recording. Okay, the recording is started. And let me put up the first slide here. Excuse me. All right, we have, I know this doesn't qualify as a mind map, but it's going to serve the same function. So it's kind of come together for me about how alchemy is going to play out over the next few months and how it's been playing out. And this general scheme is going to be the case. It's going to iterate. It's going to be like holographic in life with all sorts of stuff that you do. Let me use the drawing tool for a second here and see how that works out with GoToWebinar, just to play around here. So if you, just at the bottom here of this slide, you kind of start out where, this is going to be very simple. You kind of start out like if there's yourself or another person, I'll just put an X for that. A little hard with the mouse for me to draw. But if that's where the person is starting out, then you'll start there, and then you'll try to dig down to get a good firm footing and context properly on your side and such. And then you can build back up the details, and then you can advance past where you were when you started with the issue or the problem or the interaction with a person that you want to either get them to do something or dissolve a problem or do a project, any sort of thing, even just a question that you might have that you're trying to answer. Then you're kind of getting a sense of where you're at. You're, again, digging around in context, looking for a firm foothold, context, foundation, and then building back up to generally higher than you were. And this relating to the local peak metaphor, right? Then first you're kind of starting with where you're at on the whole mountain range, and then you might look around for the right mountain to be on, and then you climb up the mountain. And so that is my great my great diagram, but I think it at least gives a sense of things. So that's we're following the same as always as that with alchemy itself. And so we're currently still in this opening and bridging part where I'm talking about foundationalism. I'm not there yet. Well, we'll give some hints and I give some points about things that are fairly foundational, but it's more like I'm talking about this idea to you. And then we talked about winning and helplessness. And then we're at a point now where we're talking about strategy, mind, goals, right, goalscape, and so forth. And several minutes ago before this started, I had another thought about to add to this, and then when I went to do it, then it slipped out of my mind and it hasn't come back yet. But I might add a word or two here on any of these over time, but this gives us a sense. And this is kind of a good bridging topics to talk about. Practical, relatable, but still we want to go from here to what I'll call grounding, where we're heading to something kind of even deeper, more foundational, and more of a foothold in life. And that's going to be grounded in the idea of knowing via method, which is one of many ways to talk about the idea of foundational understanding or how to know what's true, and so forth. So that's going to be critical, but I kind of intuited, or from some experience and so forth when we were starting, I realized I didn't want to start just trying to describe this to you, that there had to be some sort of bridging discussions and topics and so forth first. And also even this amount of organization has just filled itself in for me. All of this stuff was on my mind in a sense. I didn't just come up with this, but the way it's kind of unfolding and organized is new or newly clear. So I'm obviously playing it a little bit by ear, week by week. I can't tell you that in July we're going to cover this, and then in August we're going to cover such and such, and September such and such. But we're just going to continue through and naturally build to the point where we're ready for the grounding part. This will also involve dissolving, right? As we can know what's true, it's going to be like a nice distinguishing tool or like a knife, and we're going to be able to cut out things that we don't want. Things like shame, guilt, self-sabotage, unuseful fear, unuseful anger, I don't know when frustration is probably always unuseful. Things like that, unuseful overwhelm or feelings of being stuck or blocked. And there's all kinds of goals that are kind of lying dormant in your mind and get triggered at various times. And you don't always know. You just see this kind of the symptoms, or you don't even see the symptoms, but you basically experience some of the symptoms overtly. Some of the symptoms might even be hidden, but then those symptoms produce symptoms of goals that are stuck in your mind and beliefs, which beliefs really arise from out of goals. They're still grounded in goals, actually. So we're gonna. One of the huge reasons to understand how to know properly is it's going to allow us to actually dissolve rather than struggle. Right? One of the big aspirations we have with alchemy is to reinvest our struggle and our effort into understanding how to properly dissolve and distinguish and clarify, so that it's like using our swimming effort in order to get to, or rowing a boat or whatever, our motor, to get to the right currents and ride them, rather the current in the proper direction, rather than just struggling against the current the whole way through. And in practice, that's a fairly unique idea. I'm sure it's been written about here or there, or said in some way here and there, and it pops up. But just in actual practice, normally we don't hear that. We hear something that implies that life is always a struggle, and that struggling rather than giving up is the key to success. And certainly, if you give up, then you're not going to succeed in the thing that you gave up with. That's true. But we can do something very powerful here, learn to do something, which is to learn how to target and reinvest our efforts and struggle, so that the effort regarding that particular thing actually, or that goal, that activity, that topic in life, it becomes effortless. So that's just a huge deal. And then we are also, and I've referenced this in when discussing or describing what I've talked about on certain webinars, is the topic or the idea or the concept of what you identify with. As we more and more understand the distinction between us and our minds, then, and when we understand ourselves as a being, then the question of what we identify with and how that has advantages and potential disadvantages, and how we want to be kind of aware and flexible regarding what we're identifying with at a particular time. We might be identifying with our body, or we might be identifying with, we might even have like kind of a hat or identity, like now I'm an SEO, like a search engine optimizing consultant, or now I'm an entrepreneur, or now I'm a mother or a father, right? And we can be more aware of again, the advantages and disadvantages of that identity. We can on the kind of the surface, we can pick what we're identifying with more intentionally and in a more distinct and boundaried way in different times. So, for example, when you're being a father, you might, I often just take my phone and it's not with me at all, or it's off, or it's in my trunk, or something like that. And it isn't like I read that somewhere, or that's like some big thing of mine. It's just kind of natural when you're used to thinking in terms of what you're identifying with at the time, and also when you're thinking of goals being triggered, and so forth. So there's the idea of identifying kind of on the surface, but then there's also the question of core identity. And then I wrote this here with building what we want to do, and that relates to self-image. And I thought of what I need to switch the cursor, normal non-drawing pen mode. I thought of what it was, the master key, norms and standards. Great. All right, so the concept of identity is somewhat related to self-image, but self-image is actually made up of a set of norms and standards which are like super goals, or they like act as magnets on your goals. You can think of them in the goalscape as acting on goals, however you want to think of it. But one of the huge reasons that mindset stuff, or just like setting a goal, doesn't work as well as we would think, right? Like where we'll do it and it'll be helpful, but it'll kind of dissipate, right? And we'll need to kind of get that mindset back or redo it. These norms and standards are operating like at the very, very deepest level, we could say, of our goalscape, our mind, and like acting like magnets. And a quick example also of that is if someone's been abused, it's actually fairly easy, especially if it's done over and done with and it's not going to continue, then it's not that hard to stop feeling bad about it. But the reason it's very hard in practice is there could be like a norm or a standard or like a should, like things should be a certain way, where the person will feel like they should feel hurt, or with guilt. It's pretty easy not to feel guilty except for this norm and standard idea, or a lot of things that appear on the surface as self-sabotage are really just there's a norm or a standard, or things feel like they should be at a certain level, or our income should be about the average of the people, how much people made, maybe adjusted for inflation, or our lifestyle should be about the same as the people that we grew up with in our neighborhood when we were younger. And whatever amount of money it seems like is necessary to maintain that lifestyle, maybe that's what we want, right? And if that's the case for a lot of people, just based on, I don't know, science or statistics, it's very common that people make that's how much money people tend to make. Of course, there's plenty of exceptions, but there's something going on for real there, because it's a very clear pattern with people. So this idea of how things should be, and specifics of it, this should be that way, this should be that way. I should feel bad about this thing that I did in the past, or this thing that was done for me. I should feel bad toward this other person. I should feel hurt whenever I think about it, or I should feel bad about something that happened to someone else, or I don't care about them. All these things is a huge deal for you, and if we don't do alchemy together, and I don't lead you through this, we can't, with an act of will, get rid of these things. And like all these goals and deep goals in our mind, the reason that just pure mindset stuff like persevere or advice like focus, you got to focus, the reason why that is helpful to an extent, but it doesn't just like perfectly work to just say, all right, from now on I'm going to focus, or I'm not going to procrastinate, or whatever. The real issue is there's all this stuff going on in our minds that's there that we just can't get rid of through one decision or one act of will. The decision that will lead to everything else is this kind of foundational decision, this idea of winning, ultimately. This idea of seeking understanding, or when we realize how important it is to have like that knife for ideas of a method by which we can distinguish how to know and gain clarity to the point where it's clear what's wrong and what's right about a particular topic or a norm and a standard, so we can see like it's clearly a contradiction and we can clearly let it go. So you can start with, there's the one huge breakthrough that changes everything is the kind of foundational decision, the decision that foundationalism matters, rather than just this idea I'm going to climb the mountain I'm on. Instead, I'm going to look for the right mountain, so to speak. When you understand that to the right degree, and that leads to the rest, but then it still needs to be done together, right? And so everything I'm doing is leading right on the path through all of this. So I don't know, like it's a little bit like if we're driving, right? You can't program into a car exactly when to slow down, when to speed up, when to stop at a particular red light, when to turn when there's a car, like when to switch lanes, like when your car's stopped in your driveway and you're going to go to the supermarket. All that couldn't be programmed in advance. You need to navigate But you might know the exact route to get there, but you still need to navigate. It's a little bit like that with me doing Alchemy with you guys. I know the route and where we're going, and I have a good sense where people are at, which took me a while to figure out too. But webinar by webinar, we're still going to be navigating through, and I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. But it's going to play out right through here, right? So I know within great boundaries how it's going to play out, or within a clear path. Okay, so self-image again, which relates to these norms and standards, which is kind of like a super goals or magnets for goals. And then you can build your own core with clarity and intention, I wrote. I've pointed out in different ways that we've really never quite done this. We might have made certain decisions about ourselves and built our identity in a sense, but we haven't done it foundationally. So what's gone on is there's something I'm thinking about talking about in the next webinar, but I'll refer to it now, which is it has to do with clarifying something about control versus understanding, and it also relates to the idea of foundationalism and controlling your mind. And I'll just again refer to it now, which is that by default in life, your mind takes care of the context, and it kind of makes the context feel foundational. It makes, like, your beliefs, simply put, your beliefs and model for the world got installed in your mind as a framework and context for your decisions and what's important and what you're going to do each day. That got put there before you did anything with clarity and intention, right? It got put there at a young age. Since then, it's almost certainly true that you've only navigated within a certain area, starting from, like, let's say you're 20 and thinking about getting, understanding yourself or discovering yourself, right? A person starts backpacking through Europe or whatever your journey was, then, or people go to college, right, and they start to quote-unquote think for themselves. But really, they're just starting with, like, kind of very much in the middle of things, and people don't get all the way to the bottom of stuff, so that means their brain is actually controlling them in sense of studying the context. It's a little bit like I referenced before, believing the media or not. At the point where we're asking, is an article true or not that the media is saying, or is this true what they're saying about this person or that person? We've already what happens is the media determines the whole context and like landscape, and there's like a little bit of a pen, like if we're like a deer or something, or a sheep, that we're operating within. And then we can make all our own choices within that. And that's what I meant to explain next webinar, but I'll delve into that. But it's an amazing idea to really get. I want to make sure we really understand this deeply and relate it to different stuff, because that's what's going on with you in your mind. And when we try to control stuff, what's happening is that sheep really tries to organize and control its pen, right? The enclosure that it's in, it'll organize it, build it beautiful, make all kinds of choices within that. What I'm introducing you to is the idea of getting all the way to the farthest, deepest, most like a solid part of the context. Because as long as something other than you is deciding your outer boundaries, your foothold, your ultimate context, then you're being controlled, but you might feel like you have all this freedom because you have freedom within the boundary, but the boundary is set by someone or something else, including literally your own mind. And what people will do is they'll break out of the pen that they're in, right? I've said this in different ways already, and they'll be in like a bigger pen, and they'll be like, yeah, this is life, this is it, I'm enlightened, I'm awake now, because I'm in this bigger pen. But you have to get to absolute foundation, or else you're still just in a pen, like a pen, like an enclosure. So this might on the surface seem like something you've already done, but in light of what we'll cover in this grounding, you can at least check it over, double check it, or very likely you'll want to you can build it yourself in a different, new way with clarity and, as I said, intention. But intention's not nearly enough. All the intention in the world doesn't get you out of the enclosure unless you have the clarity to do so. It takes clarity, not just willpower. You can use your willpower to seek clarity, and then you need to get full clarity. You don't need to know everything at all. You can get full clarity without knowing everything. So there's a big difference, and the clarity I'm talking about is doable. So excellent. And then, and this is of course like a lesson in and of itself, is me going through this. I'm intentionally taking a little bit of time with this with you guys. And then building up. And this is the the payoff, right? The thing that we already tend to often know that we want. Although what's beautiful is people really are wanting all this, so it's great. Like I'm wonderfully appreciative. I'm enjoying the fact that that we really have a lot of enthusiasm for this, and then we'll be able to build back up with taking a look at the idea of and then the actuality of your offer, and looking at your money getting. And actually, once we look at our money getting this way, we can actually look at other areas of life this way as well. But just to keep it simple for a moment, regarding money getting, we normally are presented one of two options, and that's our pen, that's our enclosure. And it took me forever to realize about the offer personally, because what we think in terms of is like resume for a job, or building a business, being an entrepreneur. And the idea of the basis of your money getting being your offer is not something that I had really encountered in the way that I mean it, neither implicitly nor explicitly. It may be out there. I'm not worried about whether I've invented the offer thing or not. The only time when I'm really talking about being unique is when I'm talking about this grounding stuff here, especially. Then I only say it's unique for your own benefit, just so you don't project something else on it, because as far as I know, no one else is working or explaining things in this way. And so I just don't want you to not see what I'm saying because you're projecting something else on top of it. You're saying, oh, it's like this guy or like that guy's teaching. And as I always say when I say that, if someone else is saying this, that's great. And I don't know everything. I don't know every person's teaching. It may be the case, but I just don't see symptoms of it anywhere. I don't see anyone getting really close to it. Or sometimes I think they'll get close, but then they just drive way out of where I thought they were close from. Okay, so anyhow, for me, this was a revelation, and it was like within the past year. So I was already a millionaire before I realized to look at things this way, and it made me feel so much more secure and clear and grounded regarding money and so forth. I'd intuited to this, but when you intuit to something, when I talked about driving into San Francisco, that illustration, where if you kind of intuitively get to San Francisco, but you don't know exactly for sure that you're there and what exactly it is, you don't have full clarity, then you can just drive right back out again. Or even if you don't drive out again, you can just feel uneasy because you're not sure when or if you'll drive back out again, if that's where you're supposed to be, you see? And so even though I intuited to this in various ways, I didn't realize it properly. And so at least I had the peace of mind, and there's more than peace of mind. It helps with strategy too, of having this. So we'll explore the concept, and then we'll look at building it and more clearly and intentionally for yourself, as opposed to skipping right to the idea of building a business or making money, like on your own or from home, and resumes. And then once you understand offer, then you can stop thinking in terms of gatekeepers. I realized also recently that we intuitively feel this feeling of gatekeepers all the time, even if we're like on our own and we have an offer, but we don't really realize things to look at things in that way. Then we just feel like everyone else has the ticket to our money, right? We would need them to say yes. Or you can look at dating and relationships this way, where it's like all the members of the opposite sex that you're interested in are like the gatekeepers. Any one of them could let you in the gate, so to speak. But it's like that's how you feel, and it's not a nice feeling, and it's not an effective way. It's a much more difficult way to interact when you kind of implicitly see people as gatekeepers to either your next opportunity or to be your next client or to let you into a job or to promote you or to let you into a particular group or to just approve of you or whatever. I want to show you how to see things differently, where there's no such thing as seeing people as gatekeepers or not. And it's wonderful. And then that relates to what I talk about with money getting. There might be various other strategies, though, that I'll teach you. Obviously, I have a lot of experience with actual business and making money, and I will be looking at parts of that are going to be applicable for you. I'm not going to start teaching about stuff that you're unlikely to want to use because of your own path, because it's very specific to my business or my path. But there's a number of things I can certainly share with you that'll be helpful here. And then relationships is a great one, and this refers to romantic, business relationships. And I'm not going to talk much about friends or anything like that, but of course you can apply the same stuff to other types of relationships, family type things, and so forth. I probably will touch on family because that's a big one that relates to your romantic relationships. It can mess with your romantic relationships, and also it can mess with your business, right? So almost like so, I won't be. Things will apply to friendships. Not really going to be talking about that, but business, romantic, and I'll apply it as well to like some stuff about family. But when we're building this stuff, these details up, it's going to be pretty quick and easy. Even if we might spend a whole month doing it, but it's just going to be boom, 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 because we'll have such a framework and a core that when we've already dissolved things like feeling shame and guilt, when it pretty much never makes sense to feel that way, but especially like in nearly every circumstance when you can just dissolve it and not have stuff like that, then now that removes an underpinning, like something that's supporting a certain defensiveness, right? That you'll have certain responses to people that are either passive aggressive or just passive. But normally passive aggressive is pretty much how people act. If they're feeling these bad feelings, they're feeling defensive, first they feel passive until it builds up and then they lash out. And so when we remove the underpinnings of that, then that if you don't remove the underpinning, you can't just get like mindset put on top of it to stop it enough. All right. But if we remove the underpinning, we dissolve that, then you won't be acting defensively, and then you're already so far along the way of being way more effective in relationships. So then it'll just be a matter of kind of me explaining some things, boom, 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 but it'll all be doable and just make sense because we've already dissolved the things that would interfere with it, and that are upholding the bad stuff that's messing with you. Influence specifically, and then same thing here. We will have built the framework for this as we understand goals and people, and when we learn to look at them more primarily in terms of a being with goals rather than an object like a body with a mind that also sometimes like has stuff that they want, then we can be more influential, especially with any kind of long-term continuous interaction. That's where my pretty much in every case when there's no rush, then you're with alchemy, with the stuff I'm showing you, you're snowballing with everything over time. It's getting easier and more effective. You're constantly doing things in a way where you're building, right? Where you again that's going to snowball and just get easier and easier. When you are in a rush, then it can appear or be actually true that all the alchemy method isn't as applicable. So and then you can just like get angry at someone and threaten them and get them to give you a result in the moment, right? And that might work better in the very short term than trying to worry about alchemy. just in the sense of getting one thing that you want, but you're creating all sorts of other problems for yourself by doing that. And in any kind of situation where you're interacting with the person again, or especially multiple times or long term, it's definitely very counterproductive. But if it's a one-shot, short-term thing, then someone might get a better result that they can measure with statistics, with conversion, right, or with just getting someone to do something. But the other problem is that when you do that, you're also reinforcing ideas in your own mind automatically. And so you are, that's going to get stored and affect your own thinking and personality and cause issues for you that way. But I'm acknowledging that you can still sometimes get better results in the rush and in the moment, just if you're only looking at that one short-term result, just by threatening, getting pissed off, just whatever, right? Or using any kind of force or bribery or just whatever, using many more resources than normal to get something. But when I'm looking at influence, I'm just going to skip all that and that's been talked about plenty. You can read all sorts of books on sales and influence that will teach you how to do stuff short term. And some of it is fine long term, but you'll have the right foundation and framework to take what you want and use it how you want from the other books about sales and influence. And so again, I'm giving you kind of the foundational snowballing way to do it. And then you can import in all sorts of techniques and stuff that you can learn other places that I'm not going to worry about. And some of those techniques are just brilliant and innovative, and I wouldn't have thought of them, and they're just purely excellent, by the way. So I'm not, I kind of implied there that it was all kind of crap, but it's not at all. There's all kinds of brilliant sales techniques out there that I am not even aware of. Some I'm aware of, some I'm not. And all kinds of people have come up with great stuff there that I would probably never think of. And like I mentioned with the curing cancer, part of why I want to spread these ideas, there's many reasons, but one is I want people, there's so many, people are so talented in so many areas that I'm not, right? Pretty much all the areas out there, there's people that are very talented in ways that I'm not. And if they have the proper framework that I can give them, that I have, that's my strength, then they can add their talent and brilliant tactics and everything that they have in their various areas to this. And then they can kind of serve things up in a way that's even more immediately usable. Because they will have filtered and adjusted things themselves and so forth ahead of time to just kind of have their ideas be more purely good and such. Because often people kind of think of science as this great way to know stuff, but you can do stuff that like with sales where scientifically it's producing great results in the sense that you're making all these sales, but you don't measure the list burn like with your email list or just all kinds of ways that happen after the sale might not be part of that scientific split test, right? So you want to be aware of that. Okay, and then to a greater or lesser degree, we'll take a look at problem solving and potentially accelerated learning and creativity, just depending on time and what I come up with. Sorry, when I say what I come up with, these are areas that I've been expert in for long time, 15, 20 years. But anyway, to the extent that I come up with stuff that hasn't already been worked in and that I want to specifically cover after the other groundwork has been laid, then I'll cover that. All right, terrific. How was that for you guys? Let's do a quick little interaction and feedback thing before I'll do one more lesson that, you can be telling me that, but let me just say something on this next slide. And then I'm going to do a couple of other slides about. I'll talk about momentum a bit. As you're letting me know how you like that, then let me just say one more thing about alchemy. There's going to be plenty of times when the value with what we'll be doing is in the clarity, the understanding, the proof, the foundation of an idea rather than just the conclusion. On the surface, I might be saying something like, focus, right? Or love everybody, or don't rush, right? Those are, can fit on greeting cards, right? They're, or, a success poster or something, right? And I'll be reinforcing plenty of those things, but the point isn't the conclusion. We've already heard a lot of these things. The point is, again, the clarity, the building, the proof, and so forth, and dissolving the opposite so that we see it in a very different way where it's the only option. And it's all also not just a proof, but I'm going to look to fit everything into like one comprehensive model, which I have. I'm not building that. I mean, I'm always delving into extra little things that I have open questions myself about life in the world, but I do already have a comprehensive model that's built, and I'm conveying it to you each webinar, right? More of it. So it's the proof, the foundation, and it's also how it fits in with the overall comprehensive and coherent model. My model of the world is very coherent, very foundational, though where pretty much any question or objection people have to things that I talk about is no problem. Like I already pretty much understand it and can explain where the people are going on, where we're having a miscommunication or something. And I've had that coherent model for a while, for years. And again, I discover more stuff, like I talked about discovering the idea of the offer and such. But the basic ideas I'm talking about have just kept working in practice without, in a way where they fit with each other great. Like my whole worldview just fits together beautifully, and has for years. Just in terms of my experiential testimony is more what I mean. I'm not trying to assert that as fact or say that. I'm not even asserting it as like perfect knowledge or anything. I just mean that more like I'm testifying to you that my experience of it is one of coherence, and things just continue to make sense. People make sense. Events make sense. Success makes sense. Results happen. Things turn to gold, just very, very, very consistently with the model that I've been using. And I also understand how it's correct, but just experientially, it just keeps working coherently. All right. So how do you like that as a kind of rundown of Alchemy? Let's go to the phones for a moment, and then I'll continue. See if we got a whole bunch of, I hate it, I'm out. Oh, we still have this thing. Wonder how high is that? This is probably this little green diagram that's still showing up for us, isn't it? See if there's an eraser that goes with it. Erase all drawings. Boom. Okay, got it. We'll skip to the end first, and then. All right, we got one of you. Just kidding. Love it. Dave Key, Shima, thank you. I'm so glad. Feels like we have a real roadmap. Knowing our destination is exciting and a way to help me measure. Absolutely. No, and I always wanted this. But you can see how I do things is I was okay about it. Like I knew I wanted the fruit, right, of a roadmap or a mind map. I wanted it right away. I wanted it last month. I wanted it, 2 months ago or a month and a half ago. But the way I went about the fact that I wanted it was to keep laying contextual stuff by having webinars, right, and working a lot behind the scenes, preparing. And I kind of prepare in two ways for webinars, like with the whole Alchemy idea. I'm digging to understand things more deeply, and then I'm also having to prepare what I'm going to say, like on the surface. So it's kind of I organized as best as I can, but I don't really. I toward the as the webinar gets closer, like in hours or like half a day, then I'll prioritize and rush a little bit with organization to try to get enough of it that it's at least a minimal level. When it comes together very well, that's great. Sometimes it doesn't come together as organized as I'd like. Sometimes it comes together happily. This webinar itself is actually pretty well organized, so I'm pretty happy with it. And that probably the organization will be more and more. It might fluctuate a little bit, but as the days go by, or the weeks go by, probably the organization will naturally fill itself in more, right? That's again how it works, where you're kind of digging around, poking around, getting a sense of things, a framework, a foothold, and then organization becomes easier. So that's how I went about getting to the roadmap, which I'm really happy with, right? And I was comfortable with that. But it's hard because it's constantly counterintuitive, right? We all want it sooner. But this is how to get to it. It feels like you're working on the context from a lot of angles, and footholds tend to form to stand on. Yeah, or they reveal themselves, but absolutely form in our experience and in our awareness. because they're there and we found them, we discovered them. Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Wonderful. Excellent. Can we have a 5-minute comfort break? I don't want to miss anything, but I've got to go soon. Well, kind of as we're doing this, that could be part of it. Yep. Dissolve current standards and norms of clarity and understanding. The illegitimacy of government help clarify that. Great. Yeah. The one thing that I could mention that I was also thinking of this week regarding this kind of roadmap and this idea is, and I touched on this. It might have been like kind of just in a little bit of the final discussion last webinar that might not have even been recorded. I can't remember. But you know how Tony Robbins has like the fire walk, and then he also has like this thing where you can hit some seminars where you just break a board, like kind of the simpler seminars. And I did that. I actually broke like a wooden board, and I failed to at first because I was thinking about the board, and then I thought about my hand being already through the board, and then I broke it. So with alchemy, things like knowing that God exists or the government stuff is a little bit that same way in terms of they're both metaphors, but they're demonstrative metaphors. They're like they demonstrate something. They have a reality to them because the way that people look at government now is so real and contains certain clear flaws, but that people almost universally buy into. And then when we can see how those flaws are wrong, and they have to be wrong, and yet we can look around and see that people that we would otherwise be intimidated by their intellect or look at them as sort of intellectual or spiritual even authority figures, it doesn't mean that the person's all wrong, but it opens us up. There's a certain way that we let people we think that people have the context handled, right? Elites of various sorts or spiritual leaders or teachers. We kind of feel like we like them because they can kind of take care, like we feel like they have it kind of handled around I've never put it this way before, but this was very powerful for me in practice. I can testify that realizing this about my professors in college and also seeing the other fellow students not see this and clearly act as they didn't see, as people who didn't see it. I call it intimidation. It's not exactly that or not. It kind of has the same effect. Intimidation is like stay within your enclosure. But sometimes it looks just like comforting, not overtly like intimidation. It's like, it's okay. I have the context covered. You can think and question and do stuff, but like within this area. You don't go out here. Then you're going to get pressure from the group and the look and the tone, right? When you start to get out of those boundaries. And the taxation thing, the government stuff, or the proof of God, if you'll embrace them, and you don't have to right now because we're going to be getting to the method, the knife, the way to really know what's true. But as we go there, then you can apply it to those things, and you can see these people don't have the foundations covered. They don't have the boundary, the area, the context outside the boundaries covered. They might be relatively wonderful people that have a lot of truth about them and goodness. But what changed the game for me hugely, one of the definite points that I've always known was one of the things that was kind of the perfect storm that of kind of interests and inputs and topics and experiences that allowed me to get to where I can do this alchemy with you, it was with evolution, which is kind of another one to like I'm saying, the firewalk or whatever. And I might do a side thing, or even just maybe, depending on time, maybe just during the normal Monday, we have a lot of normal webinars, maybe down the road. Talk about evolution, which relates to the proof of God, but it's its own topic. But understanding how they didn't have that covered foundationally, they were wrong about certain things, no question, relating to evolution, the theory of it. And just a number of things together caused me, I wouldn't have known to put it in these terms then, but the concept I kind of intuited, and it was there, and it was a key for me, a key. was that other people didn't have the context covered. They didn't have the foundation covered. So I needed to figure it out on my own. And generally, I think the way that we'll operate, and you guys might be operating up till now, and you may not, but I'm guessing just from interacting with people overall in general, and is that we tend to act and feel as if both our own mind and then some other people, like certain teachers or spiritual leaders or other types of elites, professors, have the context covered, right? And that's again how your mind deals with you and it doesn't even want to do it. It's not on purpose. By default, it's almost like what I'm describing here is one angle metaphorically on the devil, so to speak. I'm making no statement about whether the devil, the actual existence of the devil, one way or the other. I want to just ignore that. But the idea that your mind has the context and the foundation covered, that is like the problem in essence, and reversing that, where you consciously need to get to the foundation, but anything where you feel like it could be a direct act of will, you're giving up your own personal responsibility as you as a conscious being. You're giving it back over to your brain, and you have to do it, and we'll do it together in Alchemy. Change the game completely. Love it. Awesome. Pure gold. Thank you so much. See it here. Just need to hit the pavement with it. Excellent. Love it. Thank you. The map really helps. Wonderful. Would you explain what the intent of alchemy? Do you mean the word alchemy? I talked about this, I think, in the first webinar, the idea of mixing and dissolving by understanding the elements of things. And so alchemy, in the title for this webinar series, is like conceptual alchemy, where we're going to understand, we're going to understand what like life is made up of, what like mind or thoughts, like concepts are made up of, which pretty much everything's a concept except for you as a being, but even then you understand that. So pretty much you literally will understand what the world's made up of, like kind of elementally, in terms of and I mentioned that it just to give you an answer that won't necessarily make sense right this minute, but that'll fill in, is that the world is actually composed only of conscious beings, reasons, basically of beings, and you can, if you want, you can distinguish God and non-God beings. So you can have four things: non-God beings that have a consciousness fields of those beings, including God, and reasons, and that's it. And that's that's correct, and that's definitely correct what I'm saying. But it's radically different than people thinking that the world is composed of like matter and energy and so forth. All that matter and energy stuff, that all exists within the reasons that I'm telling you. So when we understand how the world actually works and what it's actually made up of, then and most of it is understanding the world of reasons, which with the mind and the physical world, the mental world and the physical world, all is in what I'm saying is like the world of reasons or just reasons. Then we can as we understand elements, we can dissolve bad stuff and we can create good stuff. That's the idea of alchemy, and we can turn stuff in our life to gold, including for other people and our relationships with other people and so forth. Part of my demonstration is that if you look at the sphere of my life, then it's pretty extraordinary in terms of the gold and the lack of fool's gold or crap that's around. Like I haven't stomped on people on my quote-unquote way to the top, or I have really the people have just risen up, and people in my sphere are just basically better off. I'm in no way taking credit for that. Or like I'm not taking anything like full credit, or I'm not worried about partial credit. It's just the case that if I'm talking about alchemy and turning things to gold, it's really fair to say that that's what's going on in the sphere, the communication, the things that I build, the relationships that I have, and so forth. And I know why. It's based on method, not like me being good or whatever, or great or talented. And it's a system model, and I'm just showing it to you. Would things like firewalk and breaking the board, the idea is it is so powerful, that act itself changes our base norm. Yeah. Especially kind of like if you let it, then, by luck, it could just automatically do it for some people. By bad luck, it might not. It kind of has a chance at doing so, depending on kind of a little bit how it interacts with someone's mind and so forth. I don't believe they would. Would you say that? Would you say regarding the desired outcome and what seems to happen? Not to say it could be life-changing for someone. I just don't see it myself. Yeah. The metaphor might break down a little bit when I say that understanding the flaws in evolution, understanding how to know that God exists, or understanding some of the base flaws with the foundation of how government is set up these days, and how people don't see those flaws, that definitely people won't necessarily generalize that in our minds, won't necessarily let that break our minds. Maybe though, if it's like, if you're seeking in a certain way, if you're kind of seeking to kind of break open from your enclosure, then this can give you maybe one of the sledgehammers to do that, is maybe a reasonable way to put it for now. Win then attack is a better way, right? Exactly. And really, like, it's like you keep on building you look for context, like footholds in context and framework. You build from there until you can just snatch the win, just reach out and take it. Until then, taking action can happen all the way through, maybe 50-50 reflection and learning on the one hand and taking action on the other, but all of that is as part of this process of building your understanding, building from your finding, seeking, and then building from footholds. Right. They exactly, in the Brexit they sought to leave their enclosure, but they're leaving it just for another enclosure that's a little bit better, perhaps. And if I were to guess, I would say it is better. But they're still missing all sorts of things. It's not foundational. Like just leaving the European Union they're still going to maintain all sorts of incorrect ideas about the British government, right? Yeah, I'd love to do that. Megan asked about applying, like doing a walkthrough with the idea of client getting, pitching hot leads, trying to close a client. Absolutely. Oh, I didn't mention about on this outline, I could have put money getting, I could have put like consulting and JVing. As part of that and walking you through things for that. So yeah, I'll be constantly giving you stuff, even now, right, already. Of course, it's not all a walkthrough. It's not all climbing up the mountain yet. But yeah, that's where I'm getting to. But of course, the whole idea of alchemy is that in order to do a detailed walkthrough, then it's not going to help properly unless we've set the right foundation. But you have those client getting recordings where I just directly do my best to do that in the absence of walking you through everything, right, foundationally. I just kind of apply my foundational understanding to giving you a direct strategy that'll help you with client getting. And that works with everything you'll learn from Cotton and Joe Marfolio and Stephen Floyd and so forth. None of it really conflicts. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I talked about sledgehammer, Michael, I was talking about like using a little bit of a quick and dirty metaphor for breaking out of your box and boundaries in order to continue to seek a real proper foothold. Oh, thank you, Ernie. Thank you, David. Alchemy and OMG are the best. I am so happy being here. I love it. No, it doesn't sound weird, Michael. It's brilliant, and I appreciate the email, by the way, that you sent, and one of the things I keep in mind to help continue to clear that up for you. I'm just, as always, I'm building towards some of these things. Instead of rushing to address certain questions, I'm looking to clear things out so that they'll get cleared out properly. Michael Griswold wrote, "This may sound weird, but as I try to come up with my own offers, I have been emotionally stymied by this question: am I a good person?" Another way to say it is God. No, I actually so understand that. That's why I'm doing like that. Again, that's why this whole approach. These things like surface mindset stuff, it's helpful. It's not unhelpful, but there's a whole massively helpful, necessary thing, which is what we're covering, this whole alchemy path and method. And no, but that's really what's going on for people, is these deep standards and norms which relate to like, should I do this, and am I good, and our self-image. And our self-image is basically composed of these standards and norms for ourselves, like a constellation, like of these standards and norms. And it completely determines our fate, basically. When I say completely, I'm exaggerating. There's luck in the environment that we don't control, so that's very important. But it's just very big deal. And I could say statistically, it completely determines the fate, because like kind of statistically, people manifest their self-image. They live according, they achieve according to their standards and norms. And it's the only way out of that is like a powerful relationship or a powerful group of relationships. Seems like if someone were to design something like OMG, that could help break people to the next level, right? But basically it takes one or more powerful relationships to get someone even have any chance of achieving outside of their own self-image. Psychocybernetics talks about that just from kind of a scientific standpoint. Sorry, it doesn't necessarily say that about the relationship, but then we hear that just with like, even when you hear like commercials for like the Big Brother program, right? Sorry, Big Brothers and Big Sisters. That's not Orwell. That's the kind of the nice one where like a guy in college will kind of have kind of a big brother relationship with a youth who's at risk. I believe I'm calling it by the right name. But the idea is that the only way that someone's going to break out of like an inner city or a real troubled home situation is if they develop a relationship with somebody that's close and loving, right? Same thing with Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's the only way, except for alchemy, to get out, except for understanding alchemy yourself and building it yourself. That's one way. The kind of simpler way is with a relationship with a person. The problem is whoever that person is, they might have a self-image that's more productive and adaptive than yours, at least in certain areas. And then you can kind of just adopt those and try not to adopt the other stuff. But they're going to be pretty imperfect themselves. And so we're not going to win or get other people to win purely through mentoring relationships. We need to alchemize ourselves. We need to get our own foundation properly. It's a little bit like the problem with the whole Iraq war situation really was that the U.S. itself, although it compares favorably, perhaps, but that's very reasonable to suppose at least that it compares favorably to plenty of other countries. So I'm not like down on the U.S. as like a far left person might be, but there's so many deep flaws in it, and even the idea of democracy, I mean, is just silly. Like what makes to the extent that America is a good, I'm just speaking kind of colloquially and simplistically for a moment, to the extent that America is a good place and a good country, it's from the Constitution. It's not from democracy. Democracy is just mob rule, right? And so George Bush mistakenly thought it was democracy, and he was saying, we're going to spread democracy to Iraq. But you spread democracy to people that want Sharia law and that are in a civil war with two factions, where one is like 3/4 of the other. And then you have things like they kill gay people, right? It's like, I believe it's the law right now, currently in Iraq, is that being gay is basically punishable by death. I may have that fact wrong, but my understanding is that Iraq is one of 10 or 11 countries like that. So the point being, I was relating it to like a mentoring and so forth, is that even though it's very reasonable to suppose that again, just being kind of simple for a second, that like a better country than Iraq under Saddam Hussein, the flaws in the U.S. are still massive and major, and spreading it led to something that was also very flawed in many ways. And then you have those flaws, and then they could get compounded by existing flaws out there. It just wasn't enough, to have very good result. Yeah. And I'm not making any real statement about whether overall, it was better or worse. I'm just saying the part that I was saying, which is pretty cool. I didn't really touch on politics there in particular, just kind of use it to illustrate the idea. Matt wrote, this is truly earth-shattering. I've read hundreds of books on success mindset and have never come across anyone who is even close to what you talk about in this Alchemy series in LOI. See, that's the kind of thing I love. I just appreciate that. It's just wonderful. Look forward to the next few months of developing the proper foundation. It's also so great for people to hear that from you, Matt, and to hear that from people outside of myself, of course. And again, the reason I want people to hear that is only to the extent that it is true, right? If someone were to show me something that does cover what I'm covering, then, as I said, I can just sip martinis, and that's fine, as long as that person's going to really, really go for it. But as long as it actually is true, then it's critically important that people are aware that it's unique. And then not only do people not project on top of Alchemy so they don't really hear me properly, or so they do hear me properly, if they, whatever, you get it. But also, people just might not know to pay attention in the first place, to attend the webinars, to listen to the replays, whatever. And hearing that is just huge. So thank you so much. Alrighty, let's go back to the slides. Okay, I want to make a note for you. There's a little bit of a quick lesson in and of itself, but then I'll still go on to one more lesson, and then that will be that. Okay, I remember last time I did a little bit of free kind of thinking out loud about goalscape, and if chance, my son, who's just turned 4, knocks on my door to my basement, and if I'm thinking about whether to go do something with him or keep doing what I'm doing. And there's more than that, right? There's potential options about getting pissed off, yelling at him, threatening him, reprimanding him, whatever, or even just having a nice talk with him about not doing it or not. Those are all potential options, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying all those are options that I have on my plate, like that I consider, but there are certainly potential ones. So I was talking about that, but then I had another thought this week that only I just mean this in a positive way. I wish I had shared last week. I don't mean like I feel guilty or bad that I didn't share it last week, but that I at least want to add on, or that helps to clarify. It might have just seemed like, in retrospect, a little bit obvious, like what I was saying, like, oh, I think, like, as if I was saying, I think about his feelings and what he might want, and I think about what I want, right? That might seem pretty normal, and it basically is, presumably. But what is different is that, and I don't care whether it's fully unique or whatever. I'm not worried about whether exactly how you operate or not. But a distinction, a better way to put it, is a distinction that I want to make is that depending on the circumstance, but a person like myself or anyone else, their mind, although I've kind of rewired things pretty well with my mind, so I see things differently, is my point here. But by default, our minds will see people kind of more primarily as objects. In some circumstances, we see people a lot more like people, like as, more like conscious. No one really sees a person as like a conscious being quite exactly as I mean it. But still, okay. So here's how I want to put it. Pretty much everyone all the time understands the world kind of based on like the material world as primary, including with people. And so they'll kind of see people as if they're like bodies or like objects that have minds, and then those minds will have goals. Or it's like a person is like kind of an object that also wants stuff and has feelings. Sometimes they'll be much more aware of that they have feelings and wants and needs of things, and sometimes we'll be less aware. An example of when we'll be less aware is like if we're driving and all we see is like cars, especially if people aren't like in convertibles. Just imagine cars where you don't really even hardly see the people. And So if we're driving around these cars, we don't even really see the drivers. Let's say the windows are kind of tinted or the sun's in our eyes, whatever. Or it's dark, simple, right, in the evening. Then that's a time when, and also this happens online, right? Especially the less people have like an actual picture of themselves, where we see people much more like objects, or to the point where there's hardly any person that's being taken into account at that moment by our mind. Of course, if we had like a person come up to us and ask, is there a person driving the car? We'd say yes. If we were asked, does that person have feelings? We would say yes, right? But it's not really part of our calculations or awareness in a lot of cases, right? When we're driving, or especially by default, this happens with people a fair amount. And then online, and then it'll depend how we're interacting online. If we're in a Facebook group where the same people that we know talk, and they sometimes talk from the heart or share their experiences, and if they have a real picture and their real name, then it's very much like they're like a person, right? But then if we're in a different type of online environment where you remove a lot of those factors, right? Just like a comment thread with anonymous or whatever fake names, right? And we're not going to see the person again, and we haven't seen them before, and so forth. Then a lot more our mind treats them like an object, right? We don't take their feelings into account and their goals. So my point that I didn't make, but it was kind of implicit, it's so close to me at this point, but that I didn't realize to say it then, but is that part of my model is of the world, and my mind's model at this point, like where it's kind of the kind of default way I look at things at this point, is I pretty much quite pervasively, I'm not making a claim to being perfect in this way, but it's really quite pervasive, is that I see people, including places where it's a person, like a post, a comment post, or driving a car, primarily as a conscious being who has of course feelings and basically who has goals in a goalscape, and from that goalscape there's feelings in their consciousness field, and then they also have a physical body, right, and a mind. And I pretty much said that already, but a mind. When I say they have a mind, there's a goalscape, and then there's the goalscape attracts beliefs, and a whole model of the world get built on top of goals. Goals are actually primary. And so that's how I understand people, and I understand it whether or not it's just a car driving, that there's a person in it. But when I look at a car if there's a person in it, then I kind of see primarily in my model for the world, I understand it or feel it as like a personal person, a being that has this right goalscape feelings model based on that, and so forth, and that has a body, and that has a car, right, and that has a computer and an online name that they're using right then. I don't see them primarily in terms of an online name or their picture or that sort of thing. And again, that's kind of built up from scratch in my worldview. So when chance knocks on my door, that's what's going on, is that there isn't even a moment, it's not, or this happens also if someone bumps into me and it hurts or something, or if I just pass normal people I don't even know, like in the supermarket, I don't, no matter what's going on for me, I have an awareness of people as conscious beings with goalscape, like I already said, like that kind of progression, but simplistically put, as people, right, with, again, goals, feelings, and so forth. And with goals that can a little bit shift and that can get triggered and all that, right? The more we understand the goalscape, the more that's very close to primary in how I see people. And not just their bodies, but again, manifestations like a car or extensions like a car or an online identity. And so the more you understand how the goalscape works or how goals interact and how they get triggered and so forth, or just that they get triggered, right? That a lot of goals are dormant for people. And also as we develop the idea of the norms and standards and how that kind of pulls on people's goals and kind of keeps them where they're at. then so when Chance knocks on my door, I never like initially see him as an annoyance, really, or something like that. It's never like a moment of an object interfering with my goal. When I say never, maybe there's an exception in rare cases. But I can't really think of one right now that's recent. So, but I also don't want to claim that there hasn't been one. Um, but but yeah, so again, it kind of my perception starts with him as a conscious person with a goalscape and then feelings based on this. So I just want to make that distinction. And then I see people that way, and it's ultimately a very adaptive and effective and accurate way of understanding the world. And it keeps you also from those moments of flipping out. Another thing that I wanted to develop with you guys at a different webinar is how the world, in terms of results and in terms of achieving goals, and also in terms of messing yourself up in life and screwing yourself over, is very alinear. Money getting isn't a matter of like, let's just make sure I do tasks that are worth $100 an hour or more all the time and don't busy myself with minor tasks. Or it's not just linear like that. You can't just spend your time doing high dollar tasks and multiply it out. That's a linear and basically incorrect way of thinking. It sounds good until you realize that it just isn't really nearly as effective. When I explain like a linear strategy or strategy that takes advantage of the fact that the world is very alinear, like this 2 hours today is important to me and other people, right? That I'm on this webinar, and so I organize my day, at least prior to it, and when it's earlier than the night before, I organize around this performance, this moment that's alinear, that's more important than other times in my day, right? In essence, has more of an impact. Of course, there could be some other event in my day that's more important than a webinar, theoretically, and so forth, and that I would take that into account or be prepared for it. But life is so much more about being prepared to catch the big wave and not having the moments where you really screw up. And the reason I bring that up right now is because by primarily and pretty much pervasively understanding people as beings with a goalscape and feelings, that it's when you accidentally kind of perceive, or when your mind calculates and acts on the idea that a person's much more like an object, that you have those moments that you really are going to regret, right? Where you kind of lash out at someone, treat them disrespectfully, right? That's where romantic relationships really get jacked up, is like either one or repeated instances of things like that. And yeah, so that just kind of, I'm just kind of touching on that as it kind of relates to this, and also why it really matters. There's many reasons why it matters. This will relate to influence and snowballing with influence and people. It'll relate to setting people up for success and so forth. But anyway, just because I talked about that last time, I wanted to mention it. So I wrote this, right? People as beings with minds with a goalscape versus people as objects that often want stuff. And I wrote this other note, and I'll just touch on it quickly here. By default, our minds will classify people as being part of like the in-group or the out-group, depending on the certain situation. Family or not, or member of the club or not, or member of a particular group or of your race, or depending on just the situation, the context. And it's, I'm not going to get into examples and scientific studies now, but I'll make a note to hit this at some point. But it's going to surprise you, the extent to which this has an effect. And so this is once again one of those times when, by being aware of it, we both operate differently ourselves, but we also take into account strongly in our strategies with other people who are going to be operating by default to a large degree. Or they'll be, remember, like with the pen, they'll be intentional and making conscious decisions, and often good decisions within a boundary, within an enclosure, but then they won't be realized in the greater context. And this is one of those things that's often in the greater context of other people's minds, and it strongly influences them, but they don't realize it. And they can have all the good intentions and have all the conscious focus in the world and still be totally influenced by this because it's in the context that they're not aware of. It's in the boundary that they're operating within. It's part of what sets the boundary that they're operating within, rather than being within what they're looking at and deciding with. The way I look at people is in terms of, I've touched on this before, but just saying this specifically now again. I have people to whom I have a responsibility, such as, of course, family, obviously my son, my wife, the people I work with that I have agreements with, members of OMG, right? Things like that. Members of my local community in some ways, right? That I might have responsibility. Maybe not much, but to some degree, I do. To my neighbors, in terms of anything that might really disrupt their experience or property, like loud music or whatever, right? Having Bermuda grass growing and getting off their lawn, whatever, right? So I just distinguish that way in terms of, so instead of a favored group versus a disfavored group, and then maybe a neutral, people that are neutral as well, is how the default sorts. Instead, I sort in terms of responsibilities and then everybody. Now, responsibilities is an example of a boundary that if you don't have boundaries sometimes, then you can't have the greater flexibility. So this gives me a place to delineate. Otherwise, my brain will delineate here, this way, which is not helpful, not adaptive, and basically just often mean. And you make wrong prisoner's dilemma type game theory decisions when you operate this way that hurt people, and that'll ultimately hurt you as well, and impoverish your world and their world. But in order to not think this way, we can't just do it through an act of will. We need to think in terms of we need to have some dividing line. There has to be some way of identifying our family versus not our family. If I said I treat everyone on Earth exactly with the same amount of priority, or that I can't do that because I couldn't possibly treat everyone on the world like I treat my son. Or I have to feed and clothe my son, I have to keep him safe. Or I have to, at his age, at all times, someone needs to be watching him. Of course, not always me, often my wife. But you see what I mean, right? There's no way I can treat everyone like my wife, right? Or the people I work with, or even OMGers, right? I can't give everyone the same service that I give to OMGers. It's not possible for me, right? In many cases. I can make a particular recording that I release at large, but anyway, there's plenty of services I can't do. Like, obviously I discussed with you guys on webinars. If there was, 1 billion people on, I couldn't give you the same attention, right? So we need some way to draw the line, and you do it with the responsibilities. If you don't, it'll be this in-group, out-group thing. And remember, however you operate, you're automatically influencing others by influencing their standards and norms. Now, there's other influences on other people, and other influences on other people's standards and norms. So you're not the sole person influencing other people, of course, in your life, but you are an influence. And so as you act in this way, then you'll influence others to act this way. And it's a way more beautiful way to act and better for you and other people and adaptive. And I don't have a whole bunch of examples off the top of my head, and I want to get to the next slide as well. But I wanted to point this out. And I'll look to delve into this again with a little bit more at some point. But at least that probably opens your eyes to a cool thing that you yourself can delve into. And you can come up with your own scenarios and examples often. Sometimes when I give you a kind of somewhat abstract example or concept, then the way to handle it is later make a note of it and later apply it to scenarios yourself that are more concrete. And certainly it's nice if I do that for you, and I like to do it for you, and I'm not abdicating my responsibility for that. But in cases where I'm not able to at a particular time, either based on my own limitations or something hasn't occurred to me, or because I'm just touching on it like now and moving on, then you can do that. And then, of course, it's more effective anyway once you do that. And something that feels vague, often we'll want to run away from, kind of feeling-wise, don't want to think about it, or we wish that I did something different so it wouldn't be that vague for you. But if you apply it to a scenario yourself, or maybe 3 scenarios is a good idea, then you'll get a kind of magical effect of clarity. Okay. Final slide. Maybe we'll take a moment, and not like 5 minutes, but just a moment, and then I'll do this slide as well. You know what I'll do? I'll actually see if I can find the a question that relates to this too that I referenced. Sorry if anyone's been locked out. I had a little watch to make sure we don't get like spammy things, but for now I'll just approve that. All right, and then I'm looking for Alchemy 5. And then Michael Ramirez, I think, is the one. Here we go. Got it right here. Not sure if Michael's on right now, but I'm sure he'll see the replay. His question is, David, how do we build a mental toughness so that we have a strategy to achieve goals faster, and how do we measure their effectiveness? And the slide that I am going to cover now will be part of addressing that. There may be other angles on it, but this will kind of get a bit to the bottom of it. Excellent. So I'm just looking at the thread here. Great, I'll get back to this, Shima. Okay, that was a little bit of a minute or two for us. All right, so on this slide, I'm going to talk about momentum, and this probably be fairly not too tough here to go through. So we have this idea of momentum. Obviously, we have an idea like it's a positive thing, and it is overall to be able to take advantage of at times, or at a lot of times. It's in one sense a bit of a vague concept, but it also is fairly clear, and it's kind of clear in a vague way, right? Even though it's an odd statement, it probably makes sense when it relates to momentum, right? Even in physics, it's kind of a little hard sometimes to remember the actual formula. It's kind of odd. I think it requires acceleration rather than just velocity in physics. Like a very heavy train that is moving at 60 miles an hour, but if there's no friction, if it's not accelerating, I think it has no force and no momentum, if I have it right. But I have to relook that up to make sure. It doesn't matter. However, for this, I just kind of saying that for a little bit of getting our minds warmed up. Okay, but instead, let's construct the idea of momentum this way, for the sake of our talking. I think this captures the idea pretty well in a useful way. When a thought or an action that you have or take makes the next one in the same direction more likely, right? So if you want to, or if you want or need, let's say you need to start to do a bunch of work on your website or on a client's website, then, and if your mind's a little bit scattered and plus you don't feel that motivated to do it, then regardless, it remains true that if you, one way or the other, sit down and start working, then each kind of action you take and each kind of thought within that task that you have, it kind of sucks you further in, but it actually makes the next one feel easier and you're more motivated. You don't even necessarily think in these terms, right? But you tend to be more motivated. It also your mind's less scattered, your focus zooms in more on that task, and then it itself becomes easier. And there's all sorts of reasons and contextual things that start to get drawn in that, like vectors or like currents all getting drawn in that direction. Where again the motivation is easier, the understanding of it, you understand what you're doing more easily, and in every way it's kind of more likely that you'll continue in that direction. The same is true overall. The more actions and thoughts you have regarding, let's say, finding clients or people to work with, or whatever business that or offer that you're building and acting on, the more you're kind of having thoughts and taking action in any way, until and unless you encounter blocks. But that's something we were looking to dissolve ahead of time, right? So and then I'll make that relate here in a second. So let's forget about blocks for a moment. Let's say that you don't run into obstacles that'll end up stopping you. So first of all, as you gain steam, as you have thoughts and actions towards a business venture that you're doing, or an aspect of a business venture like getting clients, then whatever you do, in the absence of you being stopped, it'll of an obstacle, which we'll get to in a moment, then the next step becomes more likely and actually more effective, right? Because let's say you start networking in your town, then if you've been doing it for a couple months, then your networking itself, the same amount of time, the same amount of communicating, it'll probably be more effective. You'll probably be more comfortable with it. Plus, you'll probably be able to know more people, so you'll be able to refer to people when you're, this person, cool, I know him too. Or you might be talking to a person that you've already been introduced to, as opposed to when you were talking to someone more cold. Or maybe you have a few introductions, right? Maybe in a year of doing that, the person will know several people that you know, right? And then plus, if you're taking other actions of building up your site and your rankings on Google, then you have that going for you. So more and more currents or vectors are in your direction, and so the next step becomes more likely. And the fact that it's going to be more effective, you're going to get more bang per buck, also makes it more motivating, right? This also applies in just physics with a car. As a car gets rolling, it's more likely for it to go in the same direction that it's in inertia, right? So inertia becomes more on the side of that direction rather than working against you. So that identifies what's going on with momentum. Once that in and of itself, that identification is actually useful to kind of just see. It's maybe a little bit cliche all by itself, but weirdly for me, identifying it in that way is helpful all by itself. But then it kind of leads to some further thoughts which are less obvious. Okay, so I put obstacles aside for a moment. Let's bring them back in. Now, on the one hand, by gaining momentum, then things that could be obstacles no longer are, right? We can see this pretty easily. If you have a car that's traveling at 60 miles an hour, then it'll run right over a 2x4 generally, right? Or a truck, certainly. But a 2x4 put behind the wheels of a steel truck can keep it in a driveway or even keep it on an incline without rolling. So it's a full obstacle when the truck isn't moving, but then when it's moving at a certain speed, then it rolls right over it. So some obstacles get run right over by momentum, and so one way to deal with obstacles that you can't overcome, that you aren't overcoming right now, that regardless whether you can't, that aren't being overcome right now, is to get momentum on your side. And how do you do that? In practice, it's what we've been talking about. We get more context on our side, right? If you're not going to be able to break through a fortress one way, then to get more things in your favor first, and then you can break through the gates or whatever. Of course, separately, you can look for a weaker spot to break through, right? But right now, we're just talking about momentum, and that's kind of separate. The other thing is that obstacles can break your momentum. Also, friction can prevent you from gaining momentum. So we want to be aware of the benefits of momentum. And in practice, I just find that people very often are not acting and thinking as if they understand the benefits from momentum. Again, maybe if they had a pop quiz about momentum, maybe they could come up with this top thought here. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they come up with something a lot more vague. But still, what I find that people really don't take advantage of momentum nearly as much as they could. Focusing, channeling your focus, like Cotton talked about, that operates with a similar principle, or obviously it causes momentum. But what we want to do is plan to keep momentum up, not have it kind of stop before it starts, and then also plan. So we want to plan for it not to be like broken or stop before it starts. But also, there's a separate type of planning with momentum where we can plan on momentum. And the reason that matters is when we understand that by default, our mind thinks and extrapolates very linearly. And what I mean by that is that when you think about doing a task or accomplishing something like having a client a potential client agree to become an actual client, or a customer to become an actual customer, then there's a way that our mind just sort of imagines the situation right now with our current lack of momentum and thinks that's how hard it's always going to be to get that person to become your customer or client, or anything similar to that, your girlfriend or whatever, or just to get a particular action taken by someone that you know. Or to get them to stop doing something. So people often won't really think about, well, maybe I want some momentum on my side and timing on my side before I really ask the person to do this thing or to stop doing this thing. Or maybe asking someone to stop doing something or to do something or to change an error they're making. Maybe you can think about that like a 2x4 in your relationship with a person, where I'll see people just kind of rush out and tell someone that they're working with or that's working for them, especially, to just do something differently or to do something better or whatever, or just to do something. And I look at giving someone kind of orders or especially correcting somebody, I look at it like a 2x4, where if I don't have the right momentum overall in the relationship, it can stop the relationship or like kind of temporarily halt it, maybe not break it altogether, but be just kind of a real stumbling block that's going to cause problems for a while, or it could just kind of fizzle the relationship. It could, just depending. But roughly speaking, I look at it like a 2x4, where I want to make sure I have the right momentum before, so I pick my timing, and I might create inertia in my favor in a context that it's not just in my favor to get them to do it. They might do it regardless if I just ask them cold. I want inertia so that the relationship doesn't take a hit or have a slowdown. Do you see? And you don't always know because people often act passive aggressively, right? And so it might look like it just worked, but inside there's now friction. Oh, that's another thing, right? Is that there's like this thing working against you in their mind that's causing friction on future stuff in the relationship, and I don't want that. So, like, I want to break through that board, and I want to just rumble over the 2x4 without it really being noticed, you see? And so I might want context to be on my side before I go and ask something that might cause a little bit of friction otherwise. Because you have to do this sometimes. You have to ask someone to do something differently or to correct something, or just to do something that they don't really have to do, that they could maybe resent in some potentially, right? But if you have enough momentum going, then they won't. So you see now I'm planning for momentum. Same thing there's a way that you can just kind of be happier and more relaxed in life when you realize with certain tasks that at the point when you need to do that task, you'll actually probably feel motivated to do it. I need to give you an example here because it's actually a pretty pervasive, this comes up a lot, where, I don't know, let's say you're trying to rank a website for a client and it's going up pretty well, and then you're worried about what if it drops, and that'll cause you a whole bunch of extra work to get it back up. Whether or not that's applicable to you, at least it gives kind of a tangible scenario to operate it. Or even going to the dentist, or even going shopping for something that you feel like you don't feel like that much like going shopping today for it. What I'll realize is either if it's urgent and I don't feel like it, or just has to get done, then I'll just start doing it, and then that'll get momentum. But really, what I'll often do is just wait till it's more urgent. Often people worry, oh, does this mean I'm like a procrastinator? But some things, a lot of things in life, it doesn't matter if you do it now or do it later, really. And so just wait till you really want it, right? I'll often just not shop at the supermarket unless I'm hungry, or I won't buy clothes unless I really particularly feel like I want them. Some people get a lot of pleasure out of clothes shopping. I may get pleasure out of like shopping around for like a computer game, but I don't really get a lot of pleasure out of shopping for clothes. And so I just wait till I particularly feel very motivated to get my shoes are half falling apart or something. But then I'll actually want to get shoes, and then I'll enjoy getting shoes. Really, of course, I'm using this as a kind of trivial example, but it actually comes up all the time in useful ways. And by doing it, regarding shoes, you also realize it happens regarding work. And so I started with the scenario of worrying about if a website drops that you've been working on. Well, then, if it drops, you'll actually feel motivated. Or if some kind of emergency comes up, I'll feel like working then. And it's hard to picture now if you don't feel like working, or if it's going to feel like negative progress for a moment. But as soon as you adjust to like the quote unquote setback, but even thinking about it in advance, instead of dreading something like, oh God, then I'm going to have to do all this work. Ironically, when that thing happens, it's going to end up giving you a sense of focus and momentum. Therefore, the inertia of the situation will change, and you'll actually feel like working. You could probably remember a time when something came up that was kind of urgent, and all of a sudden you didn't really think about whether you wanted to work. You just felt motivated. You didn't hardly realize it. But you can actually plan on that. And if you're thinking, oh, I'll have to do that thing, and I'm afraid that'll happen because then I'll have to do all this work. Instead, you can just think about it like, look, if that comes up, I'm actually probably just going to feel motivated to deal with it, and then I'll feel motivated initially, and then I'll start doing it, and then just the act of doing it will get me more momentum, and then I'll feel more motivated, and so forth. Same thing with getting people to be your customer. Let's say you start a sales process, either getting clients or you're just in general advertising on the internet and looking to get customers and make sales. At the beginning of your sales process, you might have the same sales letter, and you might not be making many sales. The problem might not be the sales letter. The sales letter might be fine. You don't necessarily need to change it yet. And it might even be counterproductive to do so. You just might need a whole sales funnel. And a funnel doesn't have to be already pre-made. What I mean is you might just need to interact more with the potential customers for them to become actual customers, right? You just might need more momentum with them. It doesn't mean you need a new sales letter necessarily. Of course, some sales letters cannot be very good and can be rewritten. And if you're making your offer and you seem to be getting no headway, then yeah, you might need to look at it. And I have videos on conversion that can help with that. But and there's plenty of other people with good stuff out there that can help teach about conversion. But again, planning for momentum, thinking, well, let me first get momentum and then see what happens. And if I get a head of steam and momentum on my side and I have a bunch of interactions with people that are potential customers and they're still not buying, then I'm going to need to look at my offer and how my offer is presented, like the appearance of my offer, which might involve the actual offer, and it also might involve the way that it's framed and sold, right? And the wording on your sales letter, the look of your sales letter, or the appearance of your sales presentation, including how you're dressed and organized in terms of what is it called? Grooming, right? And then your tone of voice, your confidence, all that stuff. But even that can get better as you gain momentum, right? I'm getting more and more motivated now to get the look and the feel of the OMG Machines website to the next level, but I wasn't really motivated at certain times to do that because, first of all, there's other bottlenecks, but then I just needed to get momentum in other ways. in order to prioritize that. It's more a matter of bottlenecks than momentum, perhaps, but one way or the other. Oh, and even now, I'm not like that motivated, but I kind of want it to happen, and so I just start poking around and building a sense of things within a new platform I'm looking at for the site of the members area and so forth. And then by poking around, I'm planning on momentum. I'm planning on it's going to feel more motivating, more easy for me to continue, especially when I start realizing I don't have momentum right now. So I'm just going to poke. I don't have like big goals for the moment in the deadline type. Oh, I need to accomplish this today regarding website design and setup and so forth. And that helps show how it's one thing to kind of know the fruit you want, like to set big goals, right? Like, oh, I want my website to be beautiful and streamlined and all that. That's helpful, and that can help build creative tension and motivation as you look at the way things are now, and you imagine a big, nice idea of how you want them to be. Not so much that it's challenging, but at least that it's appealing. Big in the sense of appealing, not necessarily big in the sense of challenging. But however, I can have a big goal, but when I sit down later today to poke around inside of the new platform that I might be trying to learn and work from and use to create a better website, I don't need to have a big goal today. I can have a big goal overall that today is part of, but I don't need to be like, oh, I need to accomplish all this stuff today and feel like, oh man, I'm not getting very far. I can pretty much tell you I'm not going to get that far by a certain measure today when I poke around later, but I will get plenty far in sense of building momentum, building out, poking around to find a sense of a foothold and a framework that gets built in my mind for how the platform kind of fits together, and so forth. That I will do, and that's an effective way to look at it. And then that'll get momentum. So I'm planning on momentum getting built, and I'm planning on feeling different and having my actions be more effective and leveraged in the future. I'm not going to get caught up in how effective my actions seem today in terms of results, and have my mind extrapolate that and think, oh man, I didn't get much or anything in the way of tangible results today. Therefore, I'm going to multiply zeros in my mind. That's what I'm not going to do, right? But by default, people let their mind just multiply zeros and feel like they're not making progress. They feel dejected. They feel less motivated. If you plan a momentum, you can feel more motivated and realize you will feel more motivated over the time and take advantage of it. The idea that, and Cotton mentioned this, like how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. That's good. That's that's an illustration that takes advantage. But now you understand what that does. Is it takes advantage of the idea a bit of a momentum. And anything where it's like where people are giving you advice to just get started, that again could be like kind of a cliche, it can fit on a greeting card, but or at least a accessories card or like a thing on your desk, right? But now you see why just getting started. Now you can have a model. This can fill in more of your model for how goals work and how life works and how work works and money getting and all that, where your model takes into account momentum, including taking into account that by default, this is important, by default your brain's going to extrapolate linearly. So you need to step in and intentionally look at it in terms of motivation and momentum, where it's alinear and in this case accelerating, or for you maybe the curve is like this. See, I think in terms of you guys, as there, as well as just my own perspective. People, it's like a test if people do things backward. Anyway, plan for the curve to go upward, the momentum curve, instead of the linear curve, and realize by default, your mind will keep defaulting back to the linear curve. However, that may change. It's probably the case that my mind takes more into account that momentum curve at this point and plans on it better. It may not be kind of perfect in that way either, but it more takes into account for sure. So we plan in terms of overcoming obstacles, we gain momentum, but we also plan in terms of, but there's another thing I need to add here, in terms of that we'll feel more motivated and that we don't need to feel dejected about our progress because we can plan a momentum. And then that we can actually like block our momentum, the benefit of momentum in terms of motivation by not realizing that it's about to happen. It's like realizing momentum is going to be on our side is in and of itself motivating. And not realizing it is in and of itself demotivating. But I need to cover something else, which is, so how do we, or that we want to plan to not have drag and to not have obstacles that will stop us even if we're going 60. So if we're going 60 miles an hour in a truck, we might get over a 2x4, but there are obstacles where the truck will just smash right into them. So we want to clear those out in advance. If we're going to accelerate and break through stuff, we actually want to survey the road first and get rid of obstacles that we could foresee. We want to clear the way. We don't need to clear the way like in a total way for the rest of our lives, right? But just practically speaking, there's a way that just by paying attention to this idea, this principle, we can alchemize, we can mix this idea in with our planning, and we could say, look, at least there's going to be some fairly obvious large boundaries, obstacles, not boundaries, obstacles, that just with a little bit of reflection and stopping and looking for them, I can see coming in advance. I'd clear those out in advance because otherwise I'd have to stop my momentum, I'd have to stop my truck down to 0 miles per hour, right? Brake, get out of my truck, tear down this obstacle somehow, right? Maybe I have to actually stop, maybe I come to an obstacle in the road, maybe I have to actually stop my truck, reverse, turn around the other direction, go to Home Depot, buy a sledgehammer or buy whatever tool it takes, drive back there, take down the wall, when I could have thought of that in advance in some way, right? Of course, I'm being a little bit metaphorical here, but I think you can apply that to your planning in business or whatever else. Could be dating or whatever. Could be business relationships, which affects your business, but it's also overlaps the idea of relationships where, okay, wait, this thing would be an obstacle. That, by the way, here's a great example of that, is before you start working with someone on a particular agreement or task or a whole venture, they're signing a contract to pay you as a consultant, you're doing a joint venture with somebody, you're doing a joint venture with someone to form something that will then also go and get clients, right? You're partnering with someone and the two of you are going to have clients together. Before you make you kind of sign or have the final agreement with your joint venture partner on your venture that you're doing, with the clients that you guys do together, you can see certain obstacles that are going to come up and plan for those in advance and agree on them in advance, because it actually might be too late later. There's all sorts of things you can agree on in advance that if they come up and you didn't agree on them, they're going to cause friction and tension. One might be a big one is exactly how you're going to do the accounting, what constitutes an expense, or what you're going to take care of on your own, and what day that accounting is going to get done and sent out to the other person. But there's other things that you can pick up in your particular ventures that can come up, and when I talk about joint ventures specifically much later, I can talk about that more specifically from my experience and so forth. So we plan on not having obstacles. Then the other thing besides just these walls, these obstacles that will stop us, are drag, friction in the opposite direction, or at least in a different direction. It boils down to the same thing, whether it's in the opposite direction or just in a different direction. It'll cause friction. If you understand vectors and there's a component that's in the opposite direction for any arrow or force that's not exactly in your own direction. So, and that's where our grounding that I referred to is going to come in, because there's deep self-image stuff, right? These norms and standards are things that are friction, that are dragging on you. And that's the question that Michael Griswold asked, right? This is an example of a drag on Michael's and all of our momentum, had to do with our core norms, our core feelings of what we should do, and are we good, and should we feel guilty and ashamed, or scared, but often we're scared of social rejection, right? That's hardwired into our minds, but then we can frame our way out of it, and so forth. So with certain drag, you'll never, no amount of mindset, and like what Matt Kellogg wrote is great, like no amount of the other success mindset books are going to reduce some of the drag that's going to come from your deeper self-image that can only be removed through the proper way of knowing and thinking and understanding. So that's part of dealing with momentum in life, is you just can't get it very well if you don't clear out drag in your life. And to the extent that you have drag, you just have it. That's part of what you're dealing with, and you get the momentum you can get within the reality of your life. So you need to deal within your current reality and not add bad by being upset about the reality. That doesn't help, right? You don't need to feel guilty or upset or ashamed of your current situation. You do the best you can within it, but separately, you can work on dissolving it, and you work on dissolving it the same way you work on any fruit or strategic objective, is you poke around for a foothold, establish a framework, and build up until you dissolve or remove yourself or remove a person or whatever else from your environment. Or maybe it's just maybe your environment just has cues of disorganization, decay, poverty, right? Where it's not a person exactly or an object, but your environment's giving you those messages, and maybe there's some cost-effective ways within your budget and time-effective to clear that up, right? Some removing of a few things that kind of indicate poverty from your field of vision that are easily removed, a few posters, right? But then you'll gain momentum in other ways in life, where part of what looks like momentum, and that effectively is the same, is removing drag, right? That looks the same as if you're accelerating, and it has the same numerical effect, basically. And what I mean is, as you get more money, then you can upgrade where you actually live, and then your neighborhood itself will be better. You can get a car that has a better interior, that's more luxurious. I'm not advising that or not, but it is true, right, that will reinforce an anti-poverty, like a wealth mentality, and it really happens. So it may or may not be cost-effective. There may be some other way to spend that money, but anyway, something to think about. And just another example of what I'm talking about. And a way that momentum builds by removing drag and then adding. The kind of poverty signals removing those can remove drag, and then adding in some kind of luxury signals. Luxury, you don't want to spend probably more than like 10%. I'm a little bit giving my opinion here, but kind of my educated guess, maybe roughly 10% on luxuries is maybe a good rule of thumb. And then that's like enough to kind of reinforce wealth and give your mind some motivation in a way, but not enough to kind of screw you up, and then once you have a kind of sense of it, then you don't have to feel conflicted or guilty. You can just say, all right, 10% is for luxuries. But I have no idea whether it's good to start with that when you have very little money. The way I operate is not doing that. First I make sure stable base, and I might not spend anything on luxuries until I have my stable spending under control. But then at that point, then you might do 10% or something. Okay, let's go back to that slide here. Finally, this is pretty cool. Momentum, I'm just reading here for a moment. Momentum is very valuable, but it does come at a cost that you want to plan into account. The cost of maneuverability. So here's what we do, and then I wrote in parentheses boundaries and sidebars. And then I wrote, do boundaries add or subtract from flexibility? So this is a pretty great concept, but I think pretty easy to communicate here. Think about, if momentum makes it more likely that you're going to proceed in the same direction, then there is a potential cost, which means that you're less likely to go in a different direction. And if it turns out to be the case that going in a different direction is better than going in the same direction you're in, then momentum can actually work against you. Now, if we think about vectors and forces for a second, to the extent that you know about those things, if you don't, you can look it up or look at a Wikipedia thing on vectors, or just ignore me. But let's say you have momentum in one direction, and then there's kind of a little bit of a turn that you need to make. A lot of that momentum is still helping you, right? The component of the vector that's a little bit diagonal, but mostly in the same direction as your momentum, there's a component that's still heading in there's a component of the old direction that's still heading in the new direction that's kind of pushing you forward, so it's helping you. but then there's a component that's kind of still pulling you to the original momentum thing and not right in the direction that you're trying to go. So you can be aware of that, and there's like a cost benefit. One of the things, practically speaking, that can come up is you can get really all the sense of momentum, like you want to keep on doing what you're doing, but the other parts of your life can actually be too much ignored. They can feel too much less important. So I deal with that with boundaries, and a sidebar is maybe a type of boundary. An example of what I mean by a sidebar is if I say, look, I'm going to make sure to spend at least an hour a day on average with my wife, plus an hour a day of like family time. That's either just with Chance or with Chance and my wife, depending on whether she needs to use that time to go do something herself or whether we can all spend it together. And then, as I've mentioned before when I said something like this in a recording, of course I could spend more. A boundary just keeps out the wrong, right? It doesn't it doesn't stop me from spending more time. But so I have that sidebar like boundary, right, where it's like a side track in my life, a parallel track that I make sure to keep. And then that makes it easy. That allows me to get momentum in a way where there's not friction or drag from wandering from the sidebar. The sidebar is boundaried off, where and I can keep it flexible where it doesn't have to be at a certain time. Well, I generally spend time with my wife when Chance still takes a nap, so that actually is more set a little bit from someone else in stone. But then the time that I spend otherwise in like family time is I keep more flexible because I can, right? So I keep as much flexibility in it as I can, but then there's the boundaries, and it's a little bit like quarantined off in a good way, where I can maintain my momentum in general and not have to watch my back with that or screw it up because it's defined, it's clear. And then you can do the same thing within your work, or like there's other things that just come up that you have to go to the dentist or get a checkup of some sort, or make sure you have your car registration, right? Things like that. And you can actually get all this momentum, but then have this drag from these extraneous tasks that feel like they're less important. And what you can do is once again have like a sidebar in your life where you, I call that also niggling type tasks, and there might be a distinction between niggling tasks and other things you might put in your sidebar, but it's at least in a subset or an example. Things that are going to kind of nag at you and again create a friction or help create an identity of someone who has their life kind of fraying at the edges, or you feel like you must be so busy because you're not attending to these simple, like relatively simple tasks, like making sure your car registration is taken care of, or whatever it might be. So I want to take care of those right away, because otherwise they reinforce again this kind of self-image of like someone that's too overwhelmed, or can't even do these simple things. So that it might work one way or the other. You want to have a kind of set apart, boundaried off, dealing with those things. It could be that you flexibly just kind of make sure you check every other day or every day, and just quickly take care of those things. And maybe you're flexible on when you do that in a day, but you still kind of make sure it happens every day, 2, 3 days, once a week, whatever. But one way or the other, where you have this sidebar that's getting those things taken care of, and where it's intentionally divorced or separated from the momentum, so you can kind of keep momentum in life for getting your clients or setting up your offer or whatever you're doing, and not feel like these things are subtracting from your momentum one way or the other, because they're just quarantined off, and you have a time when, all right, it's this time that's scheduled, I stop, I'm not working. Because you can totally maintain momentum and motivation, like for a thing in general in life that you're kind of working on that's kind of like a long-term or a kind of mid-term type thing that might take you weeks or months to do with work. And it could be outside of work too, but let's just say with work or money getting. You can have that and maintain momentum with that, and still at a particular time totally drop it for a little while. And it's pretty easy to do if you just look at it a certain way, right? You just say, all right, during this time, I'm clearly just going to have this goal triggered and nothing else is going to get triggered. I'm just, this goal is active, the other ones aren't. Your mind has a pretty easy time processing that generally. as far as I can tell. If not, then we can, we'll continue to work on stuff that'll help with that anyway. Like the stuff that we discuss in Alchemy will make it easier for you to delineate things and distinguish things. But it could be as simple as just scheduling so that your mind has a tangible, clear way or signal where, all right, we drop the other goals for now. It's not going to hurt your momentum overall with it as a week-long or multi-month-long project. But for now, I'm just taking care. It's the time to take care of what would otherwise be kind of niggling tasks that are kind of a little bit different topics, but they're all relate to just things I need to take care of, but they're not part of my main goal. So that's how you maintain momentum that way. And I'll just make the point or assert that boundaries, the way I keep showing you about them, they actually add to your flexibility. And then, as I also made the point in various ways, there's the kind of default way of looking at boundaries where they remove flexibility. You can actually use boundaries in the proper way where they add to strength where you want strength and clarity where you want clarity. But in doing so, they add flexibility overall. Right, within the area that you're intentionally bounding off, you have total flexibility within that area. If you didn't have the boundary, what happens is there's this gray area, and you start to feel more perturbed as you approach the boundary, and you actually have less flexibility. So that kind of wraps that up there. We're basically done. We'll just kind of do a little discussion and wrap up for several minutes, and that'll be that. What did you say about psychocybernetics, David? Oh, psychocybernetics is on YouTube. Good stuff. Can be clearly seen on the way to success with law of implication alchemy. Yeah, great. After 3 decades of perceiving myself as stuck, Shima writes, in getting an online business established, it seems my norm is powerfully set in failure at this point. No training has ever addressed this adequately until now with Alchemy. Excellent. And that's why I'm doing this. And that's why I worked on it in the first place. Alchemy isn't, like the ideas in Alchemy aren't really like necessarily an inherent passion of mine. It's a little bit more like I just wanted to figure out what the heck was going on in life. And then it occurred to me kind of strategically, or it seems like I have some kind of strength for this, is that I realized that we had to look in these areas. I'm not covering these areas because I want to. I'm covering these areas because I think we all need to. And I've dug in them and discovered about them because I think we need to, because I think it's like the most practical thing. Whereas by default, people tend to think these things are kind of a little impractical or too deep or whatever. But my understanding and my experience, and I think I've demonstrated this, is they're very practical. And then you wrote something earlier, Shiva, that I said I wanted to pop back to. Let me see here. Maybe it's ahead. No, maybe it was just this one. Okay, with things like a firewall breaking the board, the idea is it is so powerful that the act itself changes our base norm. And I might have addressed this a bit. I don't believe they would. What would you say regarding the desired outcome and what seems to happen? Not to say it could be life-changing for some. I just don't see it myself. Well, I think I addressed that a bit. Yeah, maybe just to be a little simple here, we can treat experiences or ideas like that as sort of things that could be what kind of breaks through. They're kind of like breaking the board itself. It's kind of like a punch or a whack or an attempt at breaking through that may or may not happen, just depending on a whole bunch of factors. And we'll be making all these different attempts also to kind of break through with Alchemy. But the approach we're taking, I think, will do it. Instead of relying on a metaphor, we're just going to get to the actual ideas. Your other big question is further down. Okay, thanks, Shiva. Yes, here we go. Okay, great. Is this a good way for me to begin with Alchemy, Shiva asks. One issue, in quotes, I bring to Alchemy, and I'm reading it out loud for people that listen on the MP3. One issue I bring to Alchemy is the years/decades of abuse from my past, and also past life stuff of mega failing as a leader. The past life is in quotes too. My story is this left me with lots of self-hate, of the male within me, and also the reverse. Men are dangerous and unsafe. This has become my model of the world, my norm and standard. This is where I begin with self-assessment as I enter into alchemy and how I will measure progress. So far, I understand my new norm will be for max happiness in a perfect world for me and others as possible. Right, like that's where you stand. But then there's a lot more work to done. Like the standing, and I think you already know this and agree with it, but I'm just saying, we stand there, and then we need to do a lot of work from there that we're doing. Right, that's why I didn't just have one webinar and say, hey, everyone have a norm or an idea for max happiness for themselves, and then for others. And exactly, and we're definitely, the stuff that I'm dealing is exactly the place to be to deal with stuff like that. That's really otherwise, yeah, some things sometimes prove effective and sometimes they don't, right? Just kind of talking it through with standard, that type of standard therapy or Gestalt, like different things or different ways to kind of break through with people. But by understanding really what's going on, again, we're going to get to the basic elements instead of when you're not using this kind of foundational alchemy approach, then you may fail, right, in breaking through these norms and so forth, because you don't, just like if you understand the basic elements of a car, you can always fix it, right? But if you understand just a little bit in general, or same thing with like WordPress, right, or designing a website, if you understand some stuff, but not really how it works, like fundamentally with the elements, the base elements, then some things you can fix and some things you can't, based on whether a certain thing, within your understanding if it works or not. But if you get the base elements, then you can fix anything. And so, given at least enough time, we could fix anything with this. And I don't think it, and I think it'll take the time. I think it takes an amount of time that's reasonable for people. It might even, it might happen hopefully a couple months. Maybe I set you up over a couple months, and maybe it's going to take another several months or a year or two. But that's within a lifespan. Like that easily fits within the amount of time that we'll generally expect to live anyway, right, and so forth. Not as opposed to like hundreds of years, or whatever. But also it won't necessarily take just days or minutes. But now, yeah, this is the way and the only way. And not because it's me, not because I'm doing it. I'm not saying I am the only way, but these ideas have to be the only way. So I'm working on them with you as best I can. But it's pretty good. I've come pretty far, and I have a lot of good stuff. So I think we'll make some great progress. Dave Keys in response wrote, I found that what David teaches seeps into my awareness in unexpected days. Often after some time has passed, a night or a few days, and something surprising has become part of my view, norms, and standards. Awesome. Yeah, because part of what I'm doing, I'm kind of doing two things in parallel with you. Again, I've referenced this in the past, but the two things in parallel are getting you to where you fully understand and can alchemize for yourself and make your own like norms and standards, and from that goals and objectives and so forth. But separately, by us just spending time together, you're gonna be influenced by my norms and standards and methods and so forth, and you want both. The influence that I do just gonna make it way easier for you, and then being able to do it yourself, of course, is gonna make it certain, right? But I'll kind of help you overcome the activation energy, so to speak, if you know that metaphor from with my own like energy and just association with me. But that wouldn't be enough in and of itself. It'll help you to then do it yourself. Exactly, you'll be in the field continuously. Awesome, exactly right. David, lots of gems here. Worthy of pondering further. Any chance of getting transcripts? Yeah, I think we're still planning that with Mike to be doing the transcripts of these. So I think that'll happen. It's pretty close to a promise at this point, and maybe I'll avoid making it a full promise, but I'm pretty darn certain that we'll be getting the transcripts. I don't have like an instantaneous process for getting it right away, but I'll get with Mike. He was traveling a bit, but I think we'll maybe have it that pretty systematized. Oh, great! Yeah, Chandra, you'll like this. This is I think I'm very pleased with this webinar. Get time on our side as well as get motivation on our side. Yeah, absolutely right, and momentum and everything. Um, one quick thing with the momentum idea about it comes at a cost of maneuverability. In addition to the sidebar for like niggling tasks, in addition to making sure you have things like your family where you don't neglect it, and maybe health, right, and so forth, exercise, that sort of thing, depending on your preferences. Um, Another thing that you want to have as a sidebar is just generally reflecting on stuff, whatever, like both life, with like since you're going through alchemy, regardless of what you're working on with your work and momentum that way, you can have some set aside as a sidebar that doesn't interfere with the momentum because it's a sidebar, but you can kind of have it encapsulated within a certain time. And it's very easy to have goals be kind of turned off and triggered at the right times when you just kind of schedule things. It's less to do with scheduling, I'm going to do this at 8 p.m., as just identifying to your mind, I'm going to work on this now for a quarantined amount of time. The quarantining, the defining, I'm going to do this for the next, while I'm getting coffee, while I'm out here, while for the next half an hour, whatever it might be. So either for an outing, like getting coffee, or I often go to dinner or lunch by myself and work on something, and I'll work on something while I'm doing that activity. That'll be my defining. By defining when it begins and ends, it's not a time management thing, it's a goal triggering and goal letting go management. So I don't really think in terms of time management typically, unless it's really relevant to that activity, which it rarely is for me. And I'll maybe talk more about that some other time. And I also talked about it. I need to lift that. I'll actually import that on a webinar, a hot seat with Joe. But I was saying that it's more about triggering and turning off goals, turning on and off strategic objectives. That's separate from dissolving ones that are fully unhelpful. Like you have a number of norms and standards and then goals and strategic objectives in your mind that are unhelpful. They're totally counterproductive and maladaptive. Those you just want to dissolve, period. But then we have some, like if you're working on ranking a website or building a business or getting clients or all the above, then those are goals that you want to keep, right? You don't want to drop, and you actually want to have momentum with that. But by having them defined within a certain either time frame or, like I said, like event frame, like if you go to a networking event, you don't have to say exactly when that's going to begin and end time-wise. It might go for half an hour longer than you thought, but still it's an event. So your goal time frame is determined by while you're at the event. Do you see what I mean? And maybe while you're driving home, you're reflecting on it and thinking about it too. But you want to have signals or definitions, whatever, defining features that for triggering goals on and off. That's yet another thing that I'll probably want to talk more about. But that's very relevant for momentum. Okay, back to the phones. Clearing obstacles, is this an example? Before closing a client, this is from Megan Lee. Is this an example? Before closing a client, you want the client intake form ready for them to fill out so as not to break the momentum of working with them by not having the form available. Think and plan ahead to keep the momentum going. Yes, excellent. Right. And one of the reasons Cotton's and Stephen Floyd's and other people's methods work so well is they, one way or the other, have built systems that work with reality, and part of reality is momentum and having it not get broken. So that's beautiful. That's a great example, Megan, of that. I'll remember that for the future. I'm teaching this in the future, or I'll hopefully remember. Shiva, how's this approach? I can look at my actions in a day. I can ask of self, or like of her mind, she means, is this action, but self is a perfectly good word to use. I'm just clarifying for people listening. I can look at actions in a day. I can ask of self, is this action building momentum? Is this action, when you're thinking about potentially taking a particular action as you're planning, is it building momentum? And what goal am I building momentum on? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Shiva. This is great. This can help me identify the momentum I am intentionally building and increase my motivation. That's just excellent. That's just exactly right. Great rephrase or example or application of what I just said. It's awesome. So great. I like it's always nice when sometimes I kind of stumble upon topics that are kind of inherently tangible and easy to explain. I think as you spend more time with me, you'll see that when I'm stumbling around or kind of vague, it really is more of both, like the topic, and the fact that I tried to come up with something more tangible and just wasn't able to before the webinar or that sort of thing. But I am aware of when things are kind of vague and how to make things understandable. It just sometimes it's just inherently doesn't happen at a particular by a certain deadline. But then we'll get to it. We'll make it work. Is the drag from momentum itself good? It isn't. Drag is, as you're asking this, I'm thinking drag seemingly would be like relative to the goal. Like, so if we call that inertia, and inertia can mean the inertia of traveling in a certain direction. So if your car is going 60 miles per hour, it has inertia for going moving in that direction. Inertia doesn't just mean standing still. So if we I think what we'd be saying here is inertia. Is the inertia for momentum itself good? It's good for that direction, and it's bad, so to speak, or counterproductive if it's better to be in a different direction. Or if it's like a diagonal, then part of like the component of the vector that's going in the way that you want is helpful, and the component that's not going in the way that you want is unhelpful. Maybe next time I'll try to have a diagram for breaking that shows like a vector diagram from the internet that kind of shows components, so you see what I mean. I'm not sure how many people already know. It might be all of you already know that from physics, but might be good if I showed a picture. David, this is super info. Thanks for thinking this stuff up and sharing. You're very welcome. Very welcome. I do put the time in, most certainly. When David is laying down the foundation. That's fun. Thanks, Brent. Chris wrote, David, I use the principle of momentum to get things done. I appreciate the reminder as I woke up today thinking something was missing, and then your webinar presented precisely the solution I needed to hear, momentum. Right, great, exactly. Yeah, I think anyone that's having any kind of success with stuff, we all take advantage and have taken advantage of momentum in our lives. And then exactly, I think, and including for myself, thinking about momentum in this way, and some of this is recent. Some of the clarifications and additions that I talked about on this slide, I clarified additionally recently, even over this week, for myself and for you guys. And of course, we've all taken advantage of this to a greater or lesser degree. But I think for myself and others, clarifying in this way is helpful. Interesting to me that, and this is continuing with what Chris wrote, interesting to me that momentum also has a surf quality. Namely, there's like surfing, right? Namely, there is a movement that is bigger than you that you contribute to in part, and if you harmonize with this flow, then just being attentive in this way further validates the forward motion of momentum. Thanks, David, for being on this morning. Happy 4th. Happy 4th to you as well, and you're welcome. And I agree with you with that. That's a great point. And anyone can refer back to this thread at Alchemy 7 and what Chris Van Dyne wrote. Also, the excellent thing that Shima wrote above that as well. And lots of other good posts. Michael Griswold writes, how do we know what is true? This strikes me as the most important question for a successful life. Yep, you're absolutely right. You've alluded to it in these trainings, but can you address it here? Oh, I'm just going to fully have several webinars about it, Michael. So the only reason I'm not getting more into it is because I'm getting into it by doing what I'm doing. Like this is in essence part of the whole lattice work or framework and building or digging, whatever, however you represent it. But in essence, I'm covering the topic as we speak. And I don't mean just by example, I mean by clearing the way for it. But I can't wait to get to it. I would have opened with it if I felt like it was all the groundwork was laid. But I feel like what we've done instead is the way to go. Do I know for sure? No, but I have some experience with it and trying to start with it. And it doesn't, it's not that people like riot or anything, but it just doesn't, there's something really effective about how I've been approaching things so far and how we've been doing it together in terms of the feedback and so forth. So this is kind of my whole plan that I've been working on since like February up until I started in mid-May that I developed for getting to how to know what is true, and then we'll build from that. And almost the applications of how to know what's true, like even applying it to wealth building and relationships, it's very helpful, and I'm glad to do it for you guys, but it's almost like an excuse in a sense, for me to just talk about how to know what's true. To me, that's it. Like, that's the thing. That's the deal. It's all important. It is that, like, if we're asking what's David all about, what does David have for me, it's that. And so no one wants to get to it more than me, and I'm just basically getting to it as fast as I can. It reminded me of the scene in Princess Bride, skip to the end, but it ain't happening like that. Right, exactly. And I'm never, right, Dave Keyes writes, I can see a lot of my own wish to speed things up in some of the questions. It will go the correct speed, or at least the best speed that I can do at my level of understanding that I have. But yeah, like I've worked a lot on understanding this, including how to explain it in Bridget, and I'm never trying to go slow. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm doubling up, right? I myself am impatient. I could, but in a fun way. I could have just done weekly webinars for double the amount of months, right? It would, in one sense, have more perceived value. It may even sell. It might have sold a lot better in the sense of that it already has. We're doing fine, but you can imagine that a longer time period once a week might seem more that people feel like they could attend, and then it would seem to have more value. But I wasn't really going for max sales. I wanted to kind of momentum is greater, right? If we do it twice a week, it'll be on your mind more. We'll just basically literally have more momentum. And I constantly pay attention to momentum. It's a huge part of my success result and formula. It's a huge part of, it's baked into OMG all over the place, right? And also like the idea of vectors, right? Getting more vectors, accelerating and all in one direction. But if you look for momentum building things, if you imagine from the perspective of designing it and then thinking designing it for members to gain momentum with money getting and get surrounded, right, with in a way that builds momentum. That's what OMG is all designed for and around. So no, I want to get to it. I'm looking forward to it, and that's part of why I doubled up 2 webinars a week. And because I want to get to it faster myself, but I can't speed things up in a counterproductive way. I can only basically spend more time, with you guys sooner. And of course, there's theoretically always a better way and a more efficient way to explain things than what I have. I'm in no way saying I'm doing it the most efficient way, but I'm doing it the most efficient way I know how. And I spent 3 months at least working on that before even starting, and I'm constantly working throughout the week on making it as efficient as I can. So whatever you get is the limit of basically the limiting factor is my own competence at this point. Oops. Celine asked David how to deal with a situation where you have lots of momentum on a goal that is not helpful and it's hard to go in the right direction. Oh, that's great. That's great. This might be one of the things where I'll think about it and deal with it in a future webinar. But let's see if I have anything that comes to me. Well, certainly the alchemy idea, you want to start to tease apart threads, right? Like you want to start to tease apart vectors, dissolve. If something's not helpful, there's always contradictions that can be identified. And when you do, there's something that goes on. I'm going to give you a little bit of a deep thought for a moment that I don't understand fully, but I understand it within this kind of boundary. There's something that goes on where when we think about fundamentally what's our root of our power, what's our leverage point for interacting with our mind and so forth. There's something, and interestingly enough, we wouldn't see it because we would see like the result of it in life, but we don't. When we use our power as a conscious being to change reality based on the difference between like using our power or not, and then we get a better result if we do use it. We don't see that go off, right? It's invisible, and we only see like the ripple effect of it. So it's interesting to try to identify it and understand it. We have to work at it to understand it. What I was saying is, so you lead your mind to a certain point of clarity in your consciousness field where the distinction is so big and obvious that it's within your ability as a conscious being to clearly see the difference. Like if you see the difference between a yard, like a lawn, with an elephant on it and one without, then you can tell the difference. Right? One's a big elephant and one's no elephant. If you make it like that clear with something in your, there is clarity that you can reach regarding this goal that you have in mind, whatever it is, Celine, that you have momentum on that's not helpful. There's a way to keep seeking and gaining clarity to where the contradiction or multiple contradictions at the root of it are so big and obvious that it's the same as being like, yeah, that has the elephant, that yard has the elephant, that yard doesn't. And when you reach a point of clarity like that, there's something that you do consciously that rewires something in your brain. I don't mean like the whole brain, but it makes a difference. And your brain responds to it, and you just win. You do something that otherwise wouldn't happen. But although actually you do it on a small scale, even within the boundaries, even the way any normal person operates, they're still making decisions that way that matter but it's within boundaries. But they're still making things better within where they're operating consciously. So it's when you have that clarity consciously that you can identify that and not that clearly, the distinction, you cause your brain to go one route rather than the other, rather than its default route. And in addition, it can fully and permanently dissolve issues for you. But you need to be doing, as I'll show you, to get that level of clarity. And you don't need me to show it to you. It exists independently of me. But at least I'll be helping you. If you get there on your own sooner than than I get to some concepts, great. But anyway, that kind of addresses something related to what you're saying. But I like when questions sometimes spark something that I can share with you to start to. Because when I have like a distinct lesson on something, then it only helps if I've referred to it and mentioned things in the past, right? Just like a pre-launch helps with sales for a launch. So, and that's what I'm looking to do, to kind of loosen things up, give you a little bit of a reference point, and it helps you feel it better in the future if I reference it now. Don't get too worried about if it makes sense, so to speak. Something won't make sense or feel like it makes sense unless you kind of triangulate on it. So the first time I mentioned it, maybe one leg of a three-legged triangulation or something like that. Bryce writes, just got on. Involving law of momentum, yesterday I was trying to do 500 free throw shots in basketball in a certain amount of time. My mind was locked onto the goal. As I got closer to 500, I started missing more shots. Does this relate to how the goal experienced a type of resistance? Right, like it's like you slow down or you start to look at the other thing as you get closer. And that's a good question on how to set things up ahead of time so you maintain momentum all the way through your goal. It strikes me as something that relates to breaking the board, where your hand will kind of slow down and hedge, like your muscles will kind of hedge as you get closer. And you want to be able to, one of the things I already knew I wanted to show you how to do as we get to the foundational stuff is how to go after goals without hedging. You want to dissolve the things that are going to hedge, and where you can be fully ruthless. So at least this gets me like a mental note and sets up the question of how do I not have to hedge and things, and I'm getting to that, and I knew I already was planning on getting to that. But yeah, you see it in practice, right? How the hedging messes you up, and how even as I referenced before, how muscle fibers hedge, right? As a real thing, and also as a metaphor, meaning that you don't use all your muscle fibers in the same direction, or else you could lift massively more heavy things, and that's when you get the stories of a mother lifting a car off of her child or something like that. For a moment, the muscles don't hedge, and they all operate more in the same direction. And then same thing under hypnosis. Someone can lift more weight under hypnosis. Debbie, wow, I've learned so much from you, and today has been amazing again. Thank you. I'm so glad, Debbie. The example about obstacles board behind the wheel when parked versus the vehicle moving and having momentum really was an aha for me, along with many others during this call. Thank you for the energy and time you put into your teachings. I'm in Project B, and there was no question about whether I would continue in Director's Cut. Great, on the Alchemy journey, or at least on Alchemy. Wonderful, thank you, Debbie. I'm so glad, and I'm very heartened. I'm very glad. We want to get everybody in Project B, hopefully popping over here. I might stick this one in Project B after the fact, just because it has the roadmap, like explains things, so anyone that might not have known to hop in, they can see what Alchemy is all about. So I might put that replay in there for them. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome that I'm having it this time. Yeah, I try to get a little bit of a balance of time zones. I always think about time zones of people around the world and things like that, and people that work during the week or all sorts of things, and try to hit both times at least. And yeah, there's something, one of my other thoughts in doubling up webinars in the week is that, of course, plenty of people might attend both. That's ideal. And it's nice for me to have some attendance and some energy on the webinar. So I appreciate you coming for that reason as well. It kind of helps everyone, right, for you to show up live and participate when it's reasonable for you too. But anyhow, I also made it so at least if someone could attend one of the 2 times regularly, then it would give you a chance to participate in one of the 2 discussions, and that's sufficient for people, and at least get some participation. Although again, to the extent that you're able to come on more often live, it helps everyone. Susanna, this is awesome. Loving this is twice a week and at times when I can attend live. Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad I got you, Susanna, and wonderful to have you here. Could I explain vectors again? I'll look to do that separately. It's in an old lesson that I did a long time ago. I might be able to import it as well, but I'll maybe just treat it separately. But roughly speaking, it's just like the idea of forces in a particular direction. So if you have a person living with you who is negative on what you're doing for work, then that's like a vector or a force that creates drag. Or if you have someone that in general is negative on you as a person, then that is a vector in the wrong direction if you're trying to have a better self-image. Or if you have someone with you who's interested in your business and supports it and helps out with it, then that's a vector helping accelerate you in the right direction. And if you have someone that mostly stays out of the way and is kind of supportive, but not like that supportive, then that's a vector a little bit in the right direction and kind of no drag in the wrong direction mostly, especially if you don't have them in the same room as you, right? Like someone who's generally supportive as a spouse, but if you're working in the same room as them when they're busy doing something else, then you don't want that. Like you want to physically be in a room with only people kind of in the same vector as you generally when you're doing something. But you can be wonderfully well off in a marriage where a person is generally supportive but doing other stuff. If you just work in a different room, but they're supportive, then it's all pretty nice, right? Jeremy writes, thank you so much, David. I'm planning to watch the replay several times. Too many gems from this, altering my perspective to allow finding more gems. All these gifts and then one webby, truly mind-opening. Wonderful. I'm so glad, Jeremy. Yeah, this is a pretty action-packed one for sure. And I'm so glad about it. Yeah, and momentum is, in practice, it's a big way that I get results for sure. This isn't like something I just came up with after the fact that sounds good. It's totally like one of my main strategies, kind of roughly a combination of focus and momentum, but using alchemy to dissolve the things that would otherwise create drag. So it's one of the reasons why I have motivation to learn some of the deepest, most foundational stuff like self-image and everything, is because it has actually such an impact on momentum, which then very practically has such an impact on my actual results and income and relationship and romance and all that. Megan Lee, excellent words on going the speed of our understanding at this time. Yeah, definitely. The more people absorb that. I think people are there. I think very much people get the fact that, especially now that we're doubling up, we're obviously, I care about going quickly. I'm not trying to slow roll things. Not to worry how others are going faster or comparing negatively or setting arbitrary time posts, which could be discouraging, right? Just be aware that there are more efficient ways and get the speed and momentum up to what I understand right now. Stay open and poking around for more efficiency and be continually happy with the momentum I can create with what I know now, and also plan that the momentum will build and that motivation will naturally be there through the entire process. Yeah, this is great. So much evidence and expression of people getting this, and both getting this with momentum, and also people are really in a great place with alchemy overall, and really ready and also breaking through to a large degree, ready for more breakthroughs. Really terrific and really more than I might have expected. So I'm really continue to be really encouraged by where people are at. David, how soon will you get this webinar posted? No rush. I just missed the first hour. I will. Usually it's within a few hours. I have to one version of it process on my computer, the one that gets recorded on my computer. That's without the webcam, and then another version gets recorded online and GoToWebinar, and then that has to process, and then I download it and upload it, process the one on my computer, upload it, and then I run it through Camtasia and make an MP3 as well and upload that. And then it's a little bit about if I have some events that I'm doing in my schedule that I usually get those things started right away. And then, but generally with a rule of thumb will be in a few hours. Last time I actually just a little bit forgot to post it until about a day and a half. But I got one of the replays up right away, the one. But then didn't get the MP3 up right away. But that'll be rare. Normally I'll get it up the same day. I like your comment. He continues to write about using the manifest ability consciously rather than the default of unconsciously. Manifestation happens regardless. Yeah, like we act upon our mind acts upon how it's currently configured all the time, and then that it's manifesting results based on that. And then he goes on to write, if one can participate consciously, then this is exciting and ideal. Absolutely. And then I referenced before, by the way, no, I'm not reading for a second. I referenced before how overly simplistic metaphor that kind of at some point breaks down, but still it's kind of helpful to a certain degree is thinking about how you kind of move your mind around with magnets, so to speak, and then your mind makes the results, but you kind of move it around with magnets. Is a little bit like, again, don't get too wrapped up in the metaphor, but it's pretty helpful on the surface to think about life that way. And it kind of gets us thinking that way. Like our mind makes stuff happen, but there's something we do that kind of can guide it around. And if we guide it to make stuff happen in terms of foundational understanding, then that changes the ballgame totally. And that's, of course, what we're doing here. In addition to everything's practical, in addition to surface stuff. And then, again, what Chris wrote was, if one could participate consciously, then this is exciting and ideal. Perhaps you can go into this a bit more later in a later webinar. And again, part of participating consciously is when you're looking to get the foothold in the foundation, rather than that's the highest or most ultimately effective way of participating consciously with your life and your mind and everything. Just a suggestion might be helpful, and it is an important distinction from all of the other manifestation doctrines. Yeah, starting with the foundation as you lay out and then doing so consciously. Yeah, thanks. I'm quite aware of like Wayne Dyer, for example, who talks a lot about manifesting. And I'll obviously, by what I've explained, I talk about things that are distinct from what he talks about. I like Wayne Dyer, who I nearly certainly passed away, sadly. But also there's definitely distinctions and additions that I'll show, and maybe places where I would disagree with him. And then we're good. Just about done here. Thoroughly enjoyed this time with everyone. Thank you, David. You're welcome, Michael. Celine, David, in one of your first webinars, you said we can help you help us by listening to what you're saying. What else can I do on my behalf apart from listening to webinars to make progress with LOI? You can kind of quarantine or schedule or whatever, like time or an event, like going out and eating by yourself or getting coffee, whatever, tea, with a notebook, and you can you can write down like a question that you are working on, and then you can kind of circle important aspects of that question. And I'll try to give more of like the kind of practical way that you can work on ideas, like in terms of like surface actions, like I just described, which is different than kind of conceptually. I'll try to develop that for you guys also a little bit more soon. But yeah, basically scheduling some time or an event to just reflect in various ways, including having a notebook and writing some stuff down, is a great way to do it. And I'll talk about how you can think through like scenarios in your mind using the concepts. Peter Turner writes, you talked about responsibilities for people in your life. You also, when I was talking about the in-group versus out-group idea, you also talked about removing people or yourself in certain cases. Can you talk about your strategy for dissolving bad or contradictions versus cases where you would just remove yourself? Oh, well, dissolving, I can kind of have a simple answer to that, I think. I'm always looking to dissolve bad and contradictions in my own mind. I might need to make a note and put something off if I have an urgent task that I'm in the middle of working on or something like that. but I'll note if I'm having like a bad fruit, there must be a contradiction. So I can't remove that. I have to excise from my mind. And then it's a little bit of just a cost benefit, alternative use of resources and priorities regarding whether I'm going to look to remove issues that from other people that I want to keep working with, or I just need to divorce, using that word in a general sense, not like a marriage sense, from people totally. So yeah, it's just kind of like looking at alternative use and priorities and so forth, and it's kind of a simple answer, and perhaps I'll have a more in-depth answer over time. Okay, I will cut this off at the mere 2 hour and 45 minute mark here. But another great one, I always think maybe there'll be an hour and a half this time. Maybe I won't have too much to say, but then they always go for about this 2.5 hour plus mark so far, and then we'll just see how things shape up as we continue. Well, thank you, Shelley. You're very welcome for another sensational webinar. That's so nice what you wrote. Thank you. She wrote, Shelley Fisher wrote, thank you for another sensational webinar, David. Spending time with you, either live or in replay, is always productive and enlightening. I'm so glad. I appreciate that. You're very welcome, everybody. Peter, Dora, Megan, Celine, Chris, and Brian, and so forth. Totally enjoy you guys' appreciation. And thank you guys for showing up live. I totally understand when you guys can't. I'm not all worried about it if you show up live or not, but I also very much appreciate when you do. All right, I'll end the recording here. You're very welcome, Shima and Carmen and Christian.